During Easter dinner, my daughter-in-law threw a wine glass at my face because I refused to let her deadbeat parents move into my home. "You are being selfish," my son screamed while she added, "You have empty bedrooms." So I smiled, stood up, and drove myself to the emergency room. With blood dripping onto my phone screen, I texted my lawyer a single sentence. Phase 1 is complete. If you are watching this, hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach your own children a lesson they will never forget. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Thaddeus King and I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years as a chief engineer building bridges across the American South, infrastructure that holds the weight of millions without buckling. But as I sat at the head of my mahogany dining table last Sunday, I realized the bridge between me and my own son had finally collapsed. The sound of crystal shattering against my temple sounded like a gunshot. Then came the wet, sticky sensation running down my forehead, stinging my eye and dripping onto the starched white collar of my shirt. It was a vintage Merlot, expensive and heavy, just like the silence that instantly sucked the air out of the room. I did not wipe the blood away. I wanted them to see it. I wanted the image of my blood on their hands to be the last thing they remembered of this life. To my left sat Darius, my 32-year-old son, his mouth hanging open in a mask of cowardly shock. To my right stood Paige, his wife of 3 years, chest-heaving face twisted in the ugly contortion of a woman who has never been told no. And across from me sat the empty chairs where Paige wanted to seat her parents, Hank and Brenda, the two grifters who were currently waiting in a motel 6 miles away. This violence had started with a simple request, or rather a demand dressed up as a request. We were eating the Easter ham and collard greens, a recipe my late wife Etta had perfected over decades, when Paige cleared her throat. She put down her fork and looked at me with that influencer smile she uses when she wants my credit card. "Thad," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We need to talk about the east wing of the house, since it is just sitting there gathering dust. Darius and I think it is time my parents moved in. They are going through a rough patch, and family helps family, right?" I continued to cut my ham with precision. I took a sip of water. I looked at Darius, waiting for him to speak up, to be the man I raised, but he just stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes, playing with his food like a child. He was terrified of her. I placed my knife and fork down gently. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. "This is my home, Paige, not a shelter for people who refuse to work. Your parents are not going through a rough patch. They are fleeing eviction in Florida because of insurance fraud. Do not bring that chaos to my doorstep." That was the trigger. Paige did not expect me to know about the fraud. She slammed her hands on the table, rattling the fine china. "How dare you?" she screeched. "You live in this massive Buckhead mansion all alone. You have 5 bedrooms, Thad. 5. My parents are sleeping in a motel while you hoard space like a dragon. It is disgusting. It is racist. You think you are better than them just because you have money." Darius finally looked up, but not to defend me. He looked at me with resentment that had been brewing for years. "She is right, Dad," he said, his voice rising. "You are being selfish. Mom would never have turned family away. You care more about your antique clocks and your peace and quiet than you care about us. We are your future, but you treat us like tenants." I looked at my son. He was 32 years old, wearing a suit. I bought him eating food I paid for, living in a house I owned, rent-free for 2 years under the guise of saving for a down payment. A down payment that never grew because they spent every dime on luxury vacations and designer bags. "You are not tenants," I said, my voice low and steady. "Tenants pay rent. You are parasites. And as for your mother, do not speak her name to justify your greed. She would have thrown you out the day you quit your job without telling me." That was when Paige grabbed the wine glass. It happened in slow motion. Her hand snatched the stem of the crystal goblet, a wedding gift from my engineering firm 20 years ago. She didn't just throw the liquid. She threw the glass. It struck me just above the left eyebrow, shattering on impact. The pain was sharp and immediate, but the clarity it brought was even sharper. Darius jumped up, knocking his chair over. Paige gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she had just done. But I saw her eyes. There was no regret there, only fear of the consequences. The red wine mixed with blood soaked my shirt, staining the fabric that Etta had ironed for me before she passed a shirt I saved for special occasions. "Dad, are you okay?" Darius stammered, taking a step toward me. I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. I did not scream. I did not rage. I did not throw anything back. I simply sat there for 10 seconds, letting the blood flow, letting the reality of the moment sink into their bones. This was the line they had crossed and could never step back over. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the wound gently, just enough to keep the blood out of my eye. I looked at Paige. She was trembling now, tears of frustration welling up. "You drove me to this," she whispered, the classic anthem of the abuser. "You made me do it, Thad." I turned to Darius. He looked like a frightened boy waiting for a scolding. I felt a deep, profound sadness wash over me, not because I was bleeding, but because I realized I had failed him. I had given him too much, and in doing so, I had crippled him. "I am going to the emergency room," I said calmly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, cold and distant, like metal grinding on stone. "Do not follow me. Do not call me. Dad, let me drive you," Darius pleaded, reaching for his keys. "Sit down," I commanded. The authority in my voice froze him. "I do not know who you people are. My family died a long time ago. This is just a house full of strangers." I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I had installed with my own hands 30 years ago. I walked past the family photos on the mantle, photos of Darius, graduating photos of Etta, smiling photos of a life that no longer existed. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl in the foyer. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The air smelled of blooming dogwood and rain. I got into my sedan and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw the silhouette of my son standing in the window watching me leave. He looked small. He looked lost. But I felt nothing. The part of my heart that held affection for him had been cauterized by the impact of that glass. I drove to the nearest hospital, my vision slightly blurred by the blood still seeping from the cut. The physical pain was throbbing a dull ache behind my eyes, but my mind was crystal clear. For 2 years, I had tolerated their disrespect. I had tolerated their laziness. I had tolerated the way Paige rolled her eyes when I spoke about our history or culture. I had tolerated Darius treating me like an ATM. I thought if I was patient, they would mature. I thought if I was generous, they would be grateful. I was wrong. Kindness without boundaries is just self-destruction. I parked in the emergency room lot and turned off the ignition. Ideally, I should have rushed in to get stitches. But there was one thing I had to do first. One signal I had to send to start the machinery of their downfall. I pulled out my phone. The screen was smeared with a mix of sweat and blood. I wiped it on my pants and unlocked it. I found the contact for Anika Patel, my attorney. Anika was a shark in a silk suit, a woman who understood that in high-stakes family law, there are no winners, only survivors. We had prepared for this possibility 6 months ago, when I first found the listening device in my study. I had hoped I would never have to use the protocols we set up. I had hoped my suspicions were just the paranoia of an old man, but the cut on my forehead was the proof I needed. I typed a text message, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline. Phase 1 is complete. I hit send. I watched the 3 dots appear as she replied instantly, even on a holiday. "Are you safe?" she asked. "I am at the ER," I typed back. "Proceed with the protective order. Evict them tonight." "Understood," she replied. "It begins." I put the phone in my pocket and walked toward the sliding glass doors of the hospital. The automatic doors parted with a hiss, welcoming me into the sterile white light. As I approached the intake nurse, she gasped, looking at the blood on my face. "Sir, what happened to you?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. I looked at her, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Domestic dispute. I said my voice loud enough for the security guard to hear. I was attacked in my own home. That declaration was the first nail in the coffin of their comfortable lives. They thought they had just won an argument. They thought they had intimidated an old man into submission. They had no idea that by drawing blood, they had just handed me the keys to their destruction. The wine glass didn't just break my skin, it broke the seal on their eviction. The game had changed. I was no longer playing the role of the patient father. I was now the engineer, and I was about to dismantle their lives brick by brick. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a low electrical buzz that seemed to match the throbbing pain in my forehead. A young resident doctor with tired eyes and steady hands was finishing the 4th stitch above my eyebrow. He tied the knot and snipped the thread with a metallic click that echoed the finality of my decision. He peeled off his latex gloves and looked at me with a mixture of professional detachment and human concern. He told me that he was required by law to report this. He said that a wound caused by domestic violence involving a weapon, even a glass one, mandated police involvement. I did not object. I did not try to protect them. I simply nodded and said, "Do what you must." 20 minutes later, 2 officers walked into the cubicle. One was a younger man named Officer Miller, and the other a seasoned woman named Officer Hernandez. They saw the blood on my shirt, which had now dried into a dark, rusted brown. They saw the fresh stitches. They asked me to explain what happened. I kept my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I told them that I refused a request to house my in-laws. I told them my daughter-in-law became aggressive. I told them she threw a heavy crystal wine glass at my face from a distance of less than 3 feet. I told them my son witnessed it and did nothing. I told them I felt unsafe returning to my own home because there were 4 angry adults there who felt entitled to my property. Officer Hernandez took notes, her face grim. She asked if they had keys. I said yes, my son has a key, and he gave one to his wife. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked her in the eye and said I want them out of my house tonight. I want an emergency protective order. I cannot sleep under the same roof as the woman who assaulted me or the people who supported her. The officers stepped out to confer. When they returned, they held a clipboard. They told me that given the visible injury and the immediate threat of escalation, a judge had granted an emergency protective order. It was valid immediately. It meant that Paige, and by extension anyone she invited in who was not a resident on the deed, had to vacate the premises. Since Darius had facilitated the environment and I was the sole owner of the property, the police had the authority to remove them all to prevent further violence. They offered to escort me home to execute the order. I accepted. I sat in the back of the police cruiser watching the city of Atlanta pass by through the reinforced glass. The streetlights smeared into long streaks of amber. I felt like a stranger in my own life watching a movie about a man dismantling his legacy. I did not feel guilt. I felt the cold, hard resolve of an engineer who spots a structural failure and knows the only solution is demolition. We pulled into the driveway of my Buckhead estate at exactly 11 o'clock at night. The house was blazing with light. They were still awake. They were probably drinking my wine, eating my food, and complaining about how unreasonable I was. They likely thought I was staying at a hotel or sleeping in my car. They had no idea that the flashing blue lights reflecting off the oak trees were coming for them. I stayed in the car while Officer Hernandez and Officer Miller walked up to the front porch. I watched through the windshield. I saw the front door swing open. Darius stood there. Even from this distance, I could see his posture shift from annoyance to confusion, and finally to fear. He gestured wildly. He pointed toward the street. He was trying to explain. He was trying to charm. But you cannot charm a protective order. Officer Miller motioned for him to step aside. The officers entered my home. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. I walked slowly up the driveway, my cane clicking against the pavement, not because I needed it, but because I wanted them to hear me coming. When I entered the foyer, the scene was chaotic. Paige was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, wearing a silk robe she must have brought with her, anticipating a long stay. Her face was a mask of red, blotchy rage. Hank and Brenda, her parents, were huddled near the dining room doorway, looking like raccoons caught in a trash bin. They were holding wine glasses. My wine glasses. Officer Hernandez was speaking firmly. She told them they had 5 minutes to gather their essential belongings. Wallets, phones, keys, medication. That was it. No packing suitcases, no clearing out the fridge, no taking the silver. They had to leave immediately. Paige spotted me standing by the door. Her eyes narrowed and she lunged forward only to be blocked by Officer Miller's outstretched arm. She screamed at me. She shouted that I was crazy. She yelled that I was a senile old man who was abusing his power. She threatened to sue me for unlawful eviction. She claimed she had rights because she was pregnant, which was a lie she had been spinning for weeks. She screamed that I couldn't throw her parents out at midnight. I said nothing. I simply pointed to the clock on the wall. It was 5 minutes past 11. Their time was up. Darius looked at me, his eyes wide and watery. He looked like a child who had broken a window and expected his father to fix it. He walked toward me, his hands out suppliant. "Dad, please," he begged. You cannot do this. Where are we supposed to go? Hank and Brenda have no money. Paige is upset. Just let us stay tonight. We can talk in the morning. We can fix this. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had watched his wife assault me and had called me selfish. I looked at the man who wanted to move two grifters into the home I built with his mother. I saw no remorse in his eyes, only inconvenience. He was not sorry I was hurt. He was sorry his comfort was being disturbed. I spoke only once. I told him that he made his choice when he let his wife throw that glass. I told him that he was no longer my son, he was just an intruder. Officer Hernandez stepped in. She told Darius to grab his wallet and step outside. She told Hank and Brenda to put down the wine glasses and move. Hank tried to argue, saying he had a bad back and couldn't be out in the cold. Officer Miller placed a hand on his baton, not drawing it but letting the weight of the authority settle the argument. Hank moved. They scrambled. It was pathetic and satisfying to watch. Paige was running around grabbing her purse and her charger, screaming obscenities the entire time. Brenda was stuffing dinner rolls into her handbag, a reflex of a lifetime of taking what wasn't hers. Darius was just standing there looking between me and his wife, paralyzed by his own weakness. The officers herded them out the front door. I stood in the foyer, the master of my domain, watching the infection being purged. They tumbled out onto the porch and down the steps. The police lights washed over them, exposing them for what they were, 4 people with no plan, no money, and no place to go because they had burned the only bridge that supported them. I walked to the threshold and stood in the doorway. Paige turned back, her hair wild, her face twisted. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You will regret this, Thad," she shrieked. "You will die alone in this big empty house. I'm going to take everything from you. I will own this place before the year is out." I did not respond. I did not flinch. I looked at Darius. He was standing by the police cruiser looking back at me. His expression was a mix of hatred and disbelief. He could not fathom that his actions had consequences. He could not process that the bank of Dad was closed. He looked at the bandage on my forehead, and then he looked me in the eyes. For a second I thought I saw shame, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. He turned his back on me and put his arm around Paige. He chose his side. Officer Hernandez approached me. She handed me a copy of the order. She told me that if they returned, if they called, if they texted, if they sent anyone else to harass me, I was to call 911 immediately. She told me that a patrol car would circle the block for the next few hours to ensure they cleared the neighborhood. I thanked her. I watched as they got into Darius's car. They argued, even as they got in. I could see Paige hitting Darius on the shoulder. I could see Hank gesturing angrily in the back seat. They were a cage of rats turning on each other the moment the food ran out. They drove off, their taillights disappearing around the bend of the oak-lined street. The police cruiser followed them. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. The sound of the lock sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of boundaries. I leaned my back against the door and exhaled. The house was silent. For the first time in 2 years, it was truly silent. There was no reality TV blaring from the living room. There were no complaints about the temperature. There were no passive-aggressive comments about my cooking. There was just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a big house, 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, a formal dining room, a library. It was meant for a family. Standing there alone with blood on my shirt and a throbbing headache, I should have felt lonely. Paige had said I would die alone. But as I looked around at the space that was finally mine again, I did not feel lonely. I felt lighter. The air seemed cleaner. I walked into the kitchen. I saw the remnants of the Easter dinner. The ham was cold. The plates were half-eaten. The wine stain was still wet on the carpet. I picked up the plate Darius had been eating from and scraped the food into the trash. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it away. I did the same for Paige's plate. I cleaned the table. I scrubbed the wine out of the carpet. I was reclaiming my space. I was washing away their traces. When the kitchen was spotless, I went to my study. I sat down at my desk and turned on the lamp. My reflection in the window showed an old man with a bandage on his head, but the eyes were sharp. The eyes were awake. I pulled out my phone. It was almost midnight. I found the number for a 24-hour locksmith service, a man I had used on my construction sites for years. A man who asked no questions and did good work. I dialed the number. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "This is Thad King," I said. I have an emergency. I need every cylinder changed. Front door, back door, garage, side entry. I need it done tonight. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I told him I was securing the perimeter. He said he would be there in 30 minutes. I hung up the phone. I sat in the leather chair that Etta had bought me for my retirement. I looked at the empty spot on the wall where a picture of Darius and me used to hang. I had taken it down months ago when I realized the man in the photo didn't exist anymore. I was alone, but I was safe. The first battle was over. I had taken the blow I had bled, and I had struck back. But I knew this was just the beginning. They were desperate now. They had no money, no home, and no shame. They would come back. They would try to hurt me. They would try to destroy my reputation. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I uncapped my pen. I began to write down everything I remembered. Dates, times, amounts of money they had borrowed, insults they had hurled. I was not just an old man sitting in a house. I was a general preparing for a siege. The eviction was the easy part. The war for my legacy had just begun. The silence of the house the morning after the eviction was not peaceful. It was heavy and suspicious. I woke up at 6 o'clock, my head throbbing under the bandage, but my mind alert. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and noticed the keypad for the home security system was blinking red. I tried to disarm it with my code, the code I had used for 10 years. It beeped an error tone. I tried again. Invalid. Paige had changed the master code. Before they left, she had locked me out of my own security system. She had anticipated a moment where she would need to control who entered and exited my home. That realization sent a cold shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. If she had tampered with the alarm, what else had she done? I did not try to guess the new code. I went to my study and pulled out a business card for a private security firm run by an ex-military specialist named Marcus Vance. I had consulted with him on construction sites to prevent theft. He was expensive, discreet, and thorough. I called him at 6:15. He answered immediately. I need a full sweep, I told him. Electronic and physical. I suspect surveillance. I want your team here within the hour. Vance arrived at 7 with 2 technicians carrying black cases. They did not ask for coffee. They did not make small talk. They moved through my house with the efficiency of predators. They scanned the walls, the ceilings, the vents. I sat in the kitchen drinking my black coffee, watching them work. I felt like a specimen in a jar. For 2 years I had lived with these people. I had eaten dinner with them. I had held my son when he cried about his job. And all the while, I wondered who else had been watching. Vance came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He held a small plastic bag in his hand. He placed it on the table. Inside was a tiny black device no larger than a quarter. We found this in the living room, he said. Hidden inside the smoke detector, it is a high-definition camera with audio. It connects to the Wi-Fi. I stared at the device. The living room. That was where I watched the news. That was where I took my naps on Sunday afternoons. They had been watching me sleep. There is more, Vance said. He placed another bag on the table. This one contained a listening device, a high-range transmitter. We found this taped under your desk in the study, my study, the room where I handled my banking, the room where I spoke to my attorney, the room where I wrote in my journal. They had been listening to every call, every keystroke, every private moment, I felt a wave of nausea. This was not just a bad roommate situation. This was espionage. This was a hostile occupation. Is it still active, I asked. Vance nodded. We disabled the transmission, but it has been recording for at least 6 months based on the dust accumulation. 6 months. They had been building a dossier on me for half a year. Keep looking, I said, my voice steady, despite the rage boiling in my gut. Find everything. While Vance and his team continued to sweep the upper floors, I went into the guest room that Darius and Paige had used as an office. It was messy. Papers were strewn on the floor. Drawers were half open. In their haste to leave the night before, they had grabbed their phones and tablets, but they had left something behind. Darius's laptop sat on the desk plugged into the wall. It was an older model one he used for gaming and what he called his investments, which were mostly losing bets on cryptocurrency. The lid was closed, but the charging light was on. I opened it. The screen flickered to life, requesting a password. I looked at my son's computer and felt a pang of pity for his simplicity. I typed in his wedding date. Incorrect. I typed in the name of his dog that died when he was 12. Incorrect. I typed in page 123. The screen unlocked. He was so predictable. He was so completely owned by her that even his digital security was branded with her name. I did not care about his games or his browsing history. I went straight to the File Explorer. I searched for documents. Most of it was useless clutter resume drafts, downloaded memes. But then I saw a folder buried within the system files marked Dad's Care. The name sounded innocent. A dutiful son keeping track of his aging father's medical needs. But I knew better. I clicked on it. Inside, there were no medical records. There were no lists of my medications. There were PDF files of brochures. I opened the first one. It was for a facility called Shady Pines Assisted Living. I knew the place. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent elderly, a place where people went to be forgotten and medicated into silence. I opened the next file. It was a draft of a legal petition for emergency guardianship. It was dated 3 weeks ago. I read the text. It claimed that Thaddeus King was suffering from advanced dementia, exhibiting violent outbursts, and was a danger to himself and others. It cited specific dates of my alleged confusion. I looked at those dates. On one of them, I had been at a board meeting for a charity I supported. On another, I had been getting my car serviced. They were fabrications, lies constructed to strip me of my autonomy. But the worst was yet to come. There was a subfolder labeled Chat Logs. Darius had synced his phone messages to his laptop. He had never logged out. I opened the most recent conversation thread. It was a group chat between Darius Page and a contact listed as Mom Dearest, which I knew was Brenda Page's mother. I scrolled back to the date of the Easter dinner. Page. The old man is being difficult again. He won't let my parents in. Brenda. Just stick to the plan, honey. He is losing it. A few more months, and he will be in the home. Page. I cannot wait that long. I want the master bedroom. I want to redecorate. His taste is so dusty. Darius, babe. We have to be careful. If he suspects anything, he will cut us off. Page. He is too stupid to suspect anything. He thinks we love him. He is just a lonely old fool paying our bills. Brenda. Make sure you get the power of attorney signed before you put him away. We need access to the accounts immediately. Page. Do not worry, Mom. The old goat is dying soon anyway. If the stress does not kill him, maybe we can help nature along. Just kidding. Sort of. I stopped reading. I had to close my eyes and take a deep breath to keep my hands from shaking. It was one thing to suspect they were greedy. It was another to see it written in black and white pixels. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively planning the disposal of my life. They discussed me like I was a piece of rotting furniture that needed to be thrown out so they could enjoy the house. The old goat, too stupid, lonely old fool. These were the people I had cooked for. These were the people I had sheltered. I remembered the times Paige would hug me and say, "Thank you, Dad, you are the best." I remembered Darius telling me he wanted to make me proud. It was all a performance. Every smile, every hug, every thank you was a line in a script written by predators. They had looked at me and seen only a resource to be mined and discarded. I looked at the timestamp on the last message. It was sent 2 hours before dinner. 2 hours before she threw the glass. She had walked into my dining room, sat at my table, and eaten my food with that text fresh on her phone. The realization washed over me, not like a wave of sadness, but like a cold chemical bath, stripping away the last layers of sentimentality. The father in me died in that chair. The man who wanted to believe in the goodness of his child was erased. What remained was the engineer, the man who dealt in facts, structures, and loads. The fact was that my son and his wife were enemies. The structure of our relationship was built on fraud, and the load they had placed on me was about to be dropped back onto their heads. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a high-capacity external hard drive I used for backing up my architectural schematics. I plugged it into the USB port of Darius's laptop. I did not just copy the folder. I copied everything. The chat logs, the browser history, the financial records, the geolocation data. I initiated a full system clone. I wanted every byte of data they had generated in the last 2 years. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, Vance walked into the room. "We are done, Mr. King," he said. "We found 3 cameras and 4 listening devices. The feed was being sent to a cloud server. We have traced the IP. It belongs to an account registered to a Page King." I nodded without looking up from the screen. Disable them, I said. But do not destroy them. Bag them as evidence. I want a full chain of custody report. Vance looked at the laptop screen, then at my face. He saw the reflection of the chat logs in my glasses. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity in war zones, and he knew the look of a man who had just found the enemy inside the wire. Do you want us to scrub the devices? He asked softly. No, I said, watching the transfer hit 100%. I pulled the drive out and held it in my hand. It felt heavy, cold, and dense with potential energy. Leave everything exactly as it is, I said. If they want to play dirty, I will show them what legal dirt looks like. I am going to bury them with their own words. I stood up and closed the laptop. I put the hard drive in my pocket next to the phone that contained the photo of my bleeding face. I had the physical evidence. Now I had the digital motive. I walked downstairs. The house felt different now. It was no longer a home that had been invaded. It was a crime scene that had been processed. And I was the lead investigator who had just found the smoking gun. I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. It was cold. I needed to be fresh. I picked up my phone and dialed Anika. I have the data, I told her. I have the conspiracy in writing. Good, she replied, her voice sharp and ready. Bring it to me. We are going to draft a complaint that will make their heads spin. I walked out of the house and into the morning sun. The air was crisp. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day for a war. I thought that changing the locks and sweeping for bugs had secured my fortress. I believed that physical barriers were enough to keep the chaos at bay. But I had underestimated the modern battlefield. I had forgotten that in the 21st century a war can be waged without a single soldier setting foot on your property. The attack did not come through the front door, it came through the screen of my smartphone. It started at 9:00 in the morning. I was sitting in the kitchen reviewing the digital files I had cloned from Darius's laptop when my phone began to vibrate. It was not a call. It was a notification. Then another. Then 10 more. Within seconds, the device was buzzing continuously, dancing across the granite countertop like an angry insect. I picked it up. The notifications were from social media platforms I barely used. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I unlocked the screen and saw that I had been tagged in a video that was trending locally. The thumbnail showed a tear-streaked face I knew all too well. I tapped the screen. The video opened. Paige was sitting on the edge of a generic hotel bed. The lighting was dim, carefully chosen to cast shadows that emphasized her distress. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, one that made her look small and vulnerable. Her hair was messy, but what drew the eye immediately was the purple bruise on her forearm. It was a large, angry mark, clearly visible as she wiped tears from her eyes. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the bruise. I am an engineer. I know how impact works. I know how capillaries burst. That bruise was too uniform. The edges were too clean. It looked like theatrical makeup applied by someone who had watched too many crime dramas but had never actually been in a fight. I pressed play. I do not usually do this, she began, her voice trembling. I try to keep my family life private, but last night something happened that I cannot stay silent about. My father-in-law Thaddeus King kicked us out. Me, my husband, and my elderly parents. He threw us out onto the street in the middle of the night. She paused for effect, taking a shaky breath. She looked down at her stomach and placed a hand on it protectively. The implication was clear. She was signaling a pregnancy that I knew for a fact did not exist because I paid the premium on the health insurance policy that covered her tubal ligation 3 years ago. He knows I am expecting, she whispered, looking back at the camera with wide doe eyes. He knows we have nowhere to go, but he didn't care. He got violent. She lifted her arm, displaying the fake bruise. He hurt me, and then he called the police on us. He used his money and his connections to turn the victim into the villain. Now we are in a cheap motel, terrified and homeless. Please, if anyone can help us, we just need a safe place to stay. The video ended. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, feeling a cold fury rising in my chest. It was a masterpiece of fiction. She had taken the truth and inverted it completely. She was the aggressor, yet she played the victim. She was the one who drew blood, yet she painted a bruise on herself. She was barren by choice, yet she claimed to be carrying my grandchild. I looked at the view count. 50,000 views. And climbing. I scrolled down to the comments. They were a cesspool of misinformed rage. What a monster, someone named Sarah Jade 88 wrote. I hope he rots. Drop the address, another user commented. We will pay him a visit. This is elder abuse against her parents, one comment read. Someone needs to call Adult Protective Services on him. He is a wealthy abuser who thinks he can buy the law. Cancel him. They did not know me. They did not know that I had spent 40 years building schools and bridges. They did not know that I had supported this woman and her husband for years. They only saw a crying girl and a villainous old man. The narrative was set, and I was the target. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I declined it. It rang again immediately. I declined again. Then a text message popped up. We know where you live. Watch your back. I stood up and walked to the front window. I looked out at the street. My neighborhood Buckhead was usually quiet, a sanctuary of manicured lawns and polite distance. But as I watched, I saw Mrs. Gable, my neighbor of 20 years, walking her dog. She stopped in front of my driveway. She looked at my house. Her face was twisted in disgust. She shook her head, spat on the pavement near my mailbox, and walked away quickly. Mrs. Gable, who I had helped shovel snow when her husband was sick. Mrs. Gable, who had eaten my barbecue every 4th of July. She had seen a 60-second video and erased 20 years of history. The betrayal stung, but I did not look away. I watched a car slow down as it passed. The driver, a young man I did not recognize, held up his phone recording my house. He shouted something I could not hear through the double-paned glass, but his middle finger raised in the air communicated the message clearly enough. I closed the blinds. The siege had moved from the physical to the reputational. They were trying to isolate me. They wanted to make me a pariah in my own community so that I would have no support system when they made their next move. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Darius. I stared at the screen. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. I did not say hello. I just listened. Dad. Darius said, his voice breathless. Have you seen it? Have you seen what is happening online? I have seen it. I replied, my voice calm. It is out of control, Dad, he said. Paige is upset. She posted that video in a moment of weakness. She didn't mean for it to blow up like this. But now people are angry. They are really angry, Dad. I am getting messages from people who want to hurt you. He sounded concerned. A dutiful son worried about his father's safety. But I heard the underlying note. I heard the leverage he was trying to apply. And what do you suggest I do, Darius? I asked. You have to fix this, he said. Drop the protective order. Let us come back home. If you issue a public apology and say it was a misunderstanding, we can take the video down. We can tell everyone we worked it out. Paige will record a follow-up saying you apologized and we are a happy family again. It is the only way to stop the mob, Dad. They are dangerous. There it was, the extortion, the offer of protection from a threat they had created. It was a classic racket. Break the window, then offer to sell insurance against broken windows. He wanted me to kneel. He wanted me to admit to a crime I did not commit so that he could return to his life of leisure. He was using the court of public opinion to bypass the court of law. Did she paint that bruise herself, or did you help her? I asked. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that confirmed everything. Dad, do not be like that, Darius said, his tone hardening. Does it matter? The internet thinks it is real. The police might think it is real if enough people report it. You are an old man living alone. Do you really want to fight the whole world? Just let us back in. Hank and Brenda are miserable. Paige is crying. Just end this. You are right, Darius, I said. I am an old man living alone. Exactly, he said, sounding relieved. So just call the lawyer and— But I am not helpless, I interrupted. And I do not negotiate with terrorists even if I gave birth to them. Dad, wait, he shouted. I hung up. I blocked his number again. I stood in my study, the phone warm in my hand. My heart was beating slow and steady. They thought they had me cornered. They thought that shame would break me. They thought that I cared more about my reputation than my dignity. They were wrong. I sat down at my computer. I opened the secure cloud server where Vance's team had stored the footage from the security cameras. I found the file dated yesterday. Timestamp 7:14 p.m. I played it. The quality was crystal clear 4K resolution with high-fidelity audio. The video showed the dining room. It showed Paige screaming at me. It showed her face twisted in hate, not fear. It showed her grabbing the wine glass. It showed the wind up in the throw. It showed the glass shattering against my head. It showed the blood. It showed Darius sitting there doing nothing, Then it showed the aftermath. It showed me leaving. And then crucially, it showed what happened after I left. I watched as Paige stood in the foyer. I watched as she checked her reflection in the mirror. I watched as she took a tube of purple lipstick from her purse and smeared it on her arm, blending it with her thumb to create the bruise. I watched as she laughed and told her mother, "This is going to look so good on camera." I had the smoking gun. I had the proof that would exonerate me and destroy her credibility forever. I opened my email. I attached the video file. I addressed it to Anika Patel. My finger hovered over the send button. I could release this now. I could post it online. I could silence the mob in an hour, but I stopped. If I released it now, it would just be a he said, she said dispute. It would be a messy family drama. People would move on to the next scandal tomorrow. Paige would claim the video was doctored or out of context. She would play the victim card even harder. No, I needed them to commit fully. I needed them to lie under oath. I needed them to file a police report based on these lies. I needed them to stand in front of a judge and perjure themselves. I needed the trap to snap shut, not just on their reputations, but on their freedom. I typed a message to Anika. Subject evidence for Phase 2. Body. Do not release this yet. Keep it sealed. Let them file the affidavits. Let them testify. Let her climb higher on her pedestal of lies. The fall needs to be fatal. I hit send. I stood up and walked to the window again. The protester was gone. Mrs. Gable was gone. The street was empty. I was the villain of the day. Let them hate me. Let them scream. Let Darius think he was winning. Let Paige think she was a star. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was steady. I was not afraid of the noise outside. I knew the truth. And I knew that truth, like a well-built foundation, can wait for the storm to pass before it reveals its strength. I took a sip of water. It was cool and refreshing. "Climb, Paige," I whispered to the empty room. "Climb as high as you can. I will be waiting at the bottom." While the internet was burning with indignation over my supposed cruelty, my son and his wife were doing what they always did when faced with stress. They were spending money. My money. I sat in my study monitoring the transaction alerts on my American Express Platinum account. It was a real-time feed of their gluttony. The first alert came in at noon. A booking at the St. Regis Atlanta. 2 rooms. Ocean View Suites. They had not just booked a room for themselves, they had booked a separate suite for Hank and Brenda. The total cost for 3 nights was $4,000. I did not cancel it immediately. I wanted them to get comfortable. I wanted them to unpack their bags. I wanted them to feel the high thread count sheets and order room service. I wanted them to believe that despite the eviction, the financial umbilical cord was still intact. Darius had been an authorized user on my account since college, a safety net I had never removed because I foolishly believed he would only use it for emergencies. To him, a lack of luxury was an emergency. At 7:00 in the evening, the next set of alerts began to ping. They were dining at Atlas, the hotel's Michelin star restaurant. I opened the banking app on my tablet. I could see the pending charges: 2 bottles of Camus Cabernet, $300, a seafood tower, $150, 4 Wagyu steaks, $400. They were feasting, they were clinking glasses and toasting to their cleverness. I could almost hear Paige telling her mother how she had destroyed my reputation. I could imagine Hank laughing with his mouth full of lobster, congratulating Darius on handling the old man. They were eating my retirement. They were drinking my hard work. They believed that even though I had kicked them out, I was too weak or too afraid of public backlash to cut off the money. They thought the credit card was a peace offering, a silent apology for the night before. They were wrong. It was not a peace offering. It was bait. I picked up my landline phone. I dialed the number on the back of my own card. I bypassed the automated system and reached a fraud specialist. I gave my security answers. "I'm looking at some pending charges," I told the representative. "A hotel stay and a large dinner bill." "Are these authorized charges?" Mr. King, the agent, asked. "No," I said, my voice flat. "My card information has been compromised. I have family members who have taken possession of the authorized user cards without my consent. I need you to report them as lost or stolen immediately. I want the account frozen. I want every card associated with my social security number deactivated right now." The agent apologized. He told me he was locking the account instantly. He told me that any further transaction attempts would be declined and flagged for fraud. "Thank you," I said. "And please note that I am at home. I am not at the St. Regis. If anyone tries to call and verify identity from that location, it is not me. I hung up the phone. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the clock. It was 8:15. They would be finishing their main course. They would be ordering dessert soon, maybe a digestive, a cognac for Hank, a port for Darius. I closed my eyes and visualized the scene. The waiter in his crisp white jacket approaching the table with the leather bill folder, Darius reaching into his pocket with the casual arrogance of a man who has never paid a bill he earned. He would place the heavy metal card on the tray, not even looking at the total. He would smile at Paige. He would feel powerful. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. My cell phone rang. It was Darius. I stared at the screen. I did not answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then a text message appeared. Dad, pick up. It is an emergency. The card is not working. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. An emergency. A heart attack is an emergency. A car crash is an emergency. Being unable to pay for a $1,000 dinner you did not earn is not an emergency. It is a reality check. I imagined the scene unfolding in the restaurant. The waiter returning to the table not with a receipt for signature but with the card held awkwardly in his hand. He would lean in discreetly, trying not to embarrass them, but his voice would carry the professional firmness of rejection. I am sorry, sir, the card was declined. Do you have another form of payment? Darius would laugh nervously. He would say, try it again. It must be a chip error. It is a platinum card. It has no limit. The waiter would try again. The machine would beep that terrible final tone. Declined. Call issuer. The murmurs would start at the surrounding tables. The other diners, the wealthy elite of Atlanta, would look over. They would see the sweat breaking out on Darius' forehead. They would see Paige's smile vanish, replaced by the sharp panic of a social climber losing her grip. My phone rang again. Darius. Then Paige. Then an unknown number which I assumed was the restaurant. I silenced them all. In the restaurant, the waiter would be losing patience. The manager would be approaching. Sir, we need to settle the bill. Darius would check his own debit card, the one attached to his personal account where his meager salary used to go before he quit. Declined. Insufficient funds. He had spent his last paycheck on the hotel deposit that I had now disputed. Paige would check her purse. She had no money. Her cards were maxed out on clothes she wore once for Instagram photos. All eyes would turn to Hank and Brenda. The parents, the elders, the people who were supposed to be the safety net. Hank was a grifter. He survived by spending other people's money. He hated spending his own. He had cash stashed away, money he hid from creditors, and the IRS money he kept in a roll in his sock. He would have to reach down. He would have to expose his stash. I could see it perfectly. Hank, red-faced and furious, peeling off $100 bills one by one, his hands shaking with rage. He was paying for a dinner he thought was free. He was bleeding cash he could not afford to lose. This was the wedge. This was the crack in their alliance. Hank and Brenda were only there because they thought Darius was a golden goose. They thought he had access to the family fortune. Now they were realizing that without me, Darius was just a broke 32-year-old man with expensive tastes. They would leave the restaurant in shame. The staff would whisper. They would walk through the lobby not as VIP guests but as potential fraudsters. They would go up to their rooms and the elevator ride would be silent and suffocating. Once they were in the room, the fighting would start. Hank would demand to know why the card was cut off. Paige would scream that it was a mistake. Darius would try to defend himself, but he would have no defense. He had promised them luxury and delivered humiliation. I turned to my computer. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. To Darius King, subject notice of financial independence. Darius, as of 8:00 p.m. tonight, all credit cards, banking privileges, and authorized user accounts associated with my name have been terminated. I have also reported the transactions from the last 24 hours as unauthorized use of funds. The lease on your previous apartment was in my name as a guarantor. I have notified the landlord that I am withdrawing that guarantee effective immediately. Any debts you incur from this moment forward are yours alone. You are 32 years old. You have a degree I paid for. You have a healthy body. You have a wife who claims to be resourceful. Figure it out. Do not come to my house. Do not call me. If you need money, I suggest you ask your father-in-law. He seemed very eager to enjoy the benefits of my hard work. Perhaps he is willing to share his own. Good luck with your independence. Thad. I hit send. The email whooshed away, a digital arrow fired into the heart of their entitlement. I sat there for a moment listening to the silence of my house. It felt different now. It wasn't just empty. It was cleansed. I had cauterized the wound. I had stopped the bleeding. For years, I had told myself that supporting them was love. I told myself that I was helping them get on their feet. But looking at the bank statements, looking at the years of waste, I realized I hadn't been helping them. I had been handicapping them. I had robbed Darius of the struggle that makes a man strong. I had allowed him to remain a child. Cutting him off was the most painful thing I had ever done, but it was also the most necessary. He would hate me for it. He would tell the world I was a monster who starved his own son. But someday, if he survived this, if he found a way to stand on his own 2 feet, he might understand. Or he might not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was no longer willing to be the fuel for their fire. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. It was full of food I had bought for the Easter dinner. I took out the ingredients for a sandwich. I made it slowly, carefully spreading the mustard, arranging the ham. I sat at the small kitchen table and ate. It was a simple meal. It cost maybe $3, but it tasted better than any Wagyu steak because it was paid for with dignity. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Darius. "You are ruining my life. I hate you." I looked at the words. They were meant to hurt. They were meant to make me feel guilty. But all I saw was a temper tantrum. I put the phone face down on the table. I finished my sandwich. I washed the plate. I turned off the lights. Upstairs in the master bedroom, I lay down in the bed I used to share with Etta. I looked at the ceiling. "I miss you, Etta," I whispered into the dark. "I am sorry it came to this, but I will not let them destroy what we built." I closed my eyes. Sleep came quickly. For the first time in a long time, I did not worry about the future. The future was no longer my burden to carry. It belonged to Darius now, and I was very curious to see how he would handle the weight. I knew the legal attack was coming. It was the logical next step for a parasite that has been detached from its host. When the host cuts off the blood supply, the parasite does not apologize. It tries to paralyze the host to reattach itself. I had seen the draft petition in Darius's laptop, so I knew their playbook. They were going to claim I was mentally incompetent. They were going to argue that my decision to evict them and cut off their funding was not the act of a rational man, but the symptom of a decaying mind. 3 days after I cut off the credit cards, a black sedan pulled up to my gate. A woman stepped out. She was dressed in a sensible gray suit carrying a heavy leather briefcase. She looked tired but professional. I checked the monitor in my study. I did not recognize her, but I knew what she represented. She was the state. I buzzed her in. I met her at the front door wearing a pressed Oxford shirt and slacks. I did not look like a man in the throes of dementia. I looked like a man who was ready for a board meeting. "Good morning, Mr. King," she said, showing me her badge. "I am Sarah Jenkins from Adult Protective Services. I have received an emergency petition for guardianship regarding your welfare. We need to talk." I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "Please come in, Ms. Jenkins. I have been expecting you." She paused, looking surprised. "You were expecting me?" she asked. I nodded. "My son is desperate for money. Desperate men use desperate measures. I assumed he would try to have me declared incompetent before the end of the week. I am actually surprised it took him 3 days." We walked into the living room. It was spotless. The air smelled of lemon polish and old books. There were no piles of hoarding, no signs of neglect. I offered her coffee. She declined. She sat on the edge of the sofa, opening a thick file folder. "Mr. King," she began, her voice neutral. "The petition filed by your son Darius King and his attorney claims that you have suffered a sudden and severe cognitive decline. It alleges that you have become paranoid, violent, and financially erratic. It states that you evicted your pregnant daughter-in-law in the middle of the night without cause, and that you have cut off support for your family due to delusions of persecution." I sat in my armchair, my hands folded in my lap. I listened without interrupting. "It also claims," she continued, looking up at me, "that you believe your family is spying on you and that you have hired mercenaries to sweep your home. They are requesting immediate temporary guardianship to freeze your assets and ensure your safety." I smiled. It was a tight, controlled smile. "Ms. Jenkins," I said, "let us address these points one by one. First, regarding my health." I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a manila envelope. I handed it to her. "This is a letter from Dr. Eris Thorne, my primary care physician for 20 years. I saw him yesterday for a full physical and cognitive evaluation. You will find his contact information at the top. He certifies that I am in excellent physical health for a man of 70 and that my cognitive functions are above average." She took the letter and read it. Her eyebrows went up. "This is dated yesterday," she noted. "As I said, I was expecting you. Now, regarding the paranoia," I continued. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece. I picked up a plastic evidence bag containing the listening device Vance had found under my desk. I handed it to her. "This is a long-range audio transmitter. I found it taped under my desk 3 days ago, along with 3 hidden cameras. My security consultant traced the signal to an account registered to my daughter-in-law." "Is it paranoia if they are actually watching you, Ms. Jenkins?" She looked at the bug in the bag. She looked at me. The professional neutrality was beginning to crack. "And regarding the financial erraticism," I said, returning to my seat. "My son claims I am spending wildly or cutting him off without reason. The truth is simpler. I stopped being an automated teller machine. I pulled out my tablet. I opened an audio file. 'I want you to listen to this call,' I said. 'It took place 2 days ago. It is my son Darius.' I pressed play. The sound was crisp and clear, filling the quiet room. 'Dad, do not be like that.' Darius's voice whined, filling the space with his entitlement. 'Does it matter if the bruise is fake? The internet thinks it is real. The police might think it is real if enough people report it. You are an old man living alone. Do you really want to fight the whole world? Just let us back in.' Just call the lawyer and drop the order." I paused the recording. That Ms. Jenkins is not the voice of a concerned son worried about his father's mental health. That is the voice of a man attempting to blackmail his father into submission. He admits the abuse allegations are fabricated. He admits he is using public pressure to force me to open my wallet. Ms. Jenkins stared at the tablet. She closed the file folder on her lap. The tension in her shoulders dropped. She was no longer an investigator looking for a victim. She was a witness looking at a crime. "Mr. King," she said, her voice softer now, "this petition claims you are a danger to yourself, but based on this evidence, the only danger here seems to be your family." She took out a pen and made a large note on the front of the file. "I am going to recommend that this petition be dismissed with prejudice," she said. "There is absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline. In fact, you seem to be the most lucid person involved in this mess." "Thank you," I said. However, she continued, looking me in the eye. "I have a duty to report abuse. Financial exploitation and emotional abuse of a senior citizen are crimes in this state. Do you want me to open a case against your son and his wife?" I looked out the window. I saw the oak tree I had planted when Darius was born. It was strong and tall, but the roots were interfering with the foundation of the house. Sometimes you have to cut the roots to save the structure. "Not yet," I said. "I am handling this my way. But keep that file open, Ms. Jenkins. I have a feeling they are not done yet." She stood up. She shook my hand. Her grip was firm. "If they come back, Mr. King, if they try to force their way in, or if they threaten you again, call me. I have the authority to place them on a registry that will make their lives very difficult." I walked her to the door. As she stepped out onto the porch, she turned back. "You know, Mr. King," she said, "most people in your position crumble. They give in because they are afraid of being alone. You are very strong." "I am not strong," I said, watching a squirrel run across the lawn. "I am just disappointed. And disappointment is a very powerful fuel." I watched her car drive away. Darius had played his legal card. He had tried to use the system to crush me. But he had forgotten that the system requires evidence, and I was the only one who had it. I went back into my study. I sat at my desk and looked at the phone. I knew what would happen next. The lawyer would call Darius. He would tell him the petition failed. He would tell him the social worker found me competent. He would tell him to pay the retainer fee, which Darius did not have. Panic would set in. Real panic. I opened my journal and wrote down the date and time of Ms. Jenkins' visit. I noted the outcome. Phase 3 was approaching. They were running out of legal options. They were running out of money. They were running out of friends. Soon they would stop trying to be clever and start being desperate. And desperate men make fatal mistakes. I checked the security cameras. The perimeter was clear. But I knew they were out there plotting their next move. I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and as I was learning, the truth is the sharpest weapon of all. 2 days after the failed guardianship attempt, my phone rang again. It was not Darius this time. It was Paige. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the recording in the quiet of my study. Her voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the shrill screech of the entitled victim. Gone was the arrogant demand for my property. In its place was a soft, trembling whisper that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror for hours. She was apologizing. She was begging for a chance to explain. She claimed she wanted to make things right before the baby came. I did not believe a word of it. But I knew that a predator who changes camouflage is preparing to strike from a different angle. I needed to know what that angle was. I also needed to get them on record admitting that their previous actions were a sham. I texted back. One sentence. Meet me at the Capitol Grill at 6 p.m. It was a public place. It was expensive. It was safe. I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat in a booth near the back facing the door. I placed my phone face down on the table, recording app running. I ordered a sparkling water with lime. I waited. They walked in at 6:00 sharp. They looked different. The swagger was gone. Darius looked thinner, his suit jacket hanging loosely on his shoulders. His eyes were bloodshot, the telltale sign of sleepless nights and perhaps too much cheap vodka. Paige was dressed conservatively in a loose floral dress that hinted at maternity without actually needing to accommodate anything. She wore no makeup. She looked pale and humble. It was a costume designed to elicit sympathy. They slid into the booth opposite me. Darius could not meet my eyes. He stared at the white tablecloth as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Paige, however, looked right at me. Her eyes filled with instant tears. It was impressive, really. She could summon moisture on command like a lawn sprinkler. Thad, she began, her voice cracking. Thank you for meeting us. We know you are angry. You have every right to be. I said nothing. I sipped my water. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I moved my hand away. She pulled back, looking wounded. I want to apologize, she said. For everything. For the glass, for the video, for the lawsuit. I was not myself, Thad. It is the hormones. This pregnancy has made me crazy. I am emotional. I am scared. I just want my family back. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Darius shifted uncomfortably. We are barely eating, Dad, he mumbled. We are staying in a motel by the airport. It is loud. It is dirty. Paige needs rest. The baby needs stability. I watched them perform. It was a duet of desperation. But underneath the sorrow, I heard the hum of calculation. They were not sorry they had hurt me. They were sorry they had lost. They were trying to reset the board because they had run out of moves. I decided to feed them a little hope. I wanted to see how far they would reach. I am listening, I said, my voice neutral. Go on. Paige's eyes lit up. She leaned forward. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, eager glint. We want to start over, she said. We want to come home. We will follow your rules. We will send my parents back to Florida. It will just be us. Me, Darius, and the baby. We can be a real family again. She paused, waiting for me to agree. When I didn't, she played her ace. But Thad, we need to be practical. You are getting older. This stress is bad for you. We talked to a lawyer not to sue you, but to help you. Here it comes, I thought. The hook. We drafted an agreement, she said, pulling a document out of her purse. It is a simple family trust. It puts the house in Darius' name just for tax purposes, you understand. And it gives us power of attorney over your accounts. Not so we can spend your money, but so we can manage the bills for you. So you do not have to worry about anything. You can just relax and be a grandfather. She pushed the paper across the table. It was a single sheet heavy with legal jargon but clear in its intent. It was a surrender document. It was a voluntary abdication of my life. If you sign this, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we will drop everything. We will delete the video. We will tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. We will take care of you, Thad, forever. I looked at the paper. I looked at Darius. He was sweating. He knew this was a gamble. He knew they were betting everything on my desire for peace. I looked at Paige. She was smiling now, a small, hopeful smile. She thought she had won. She thought that by dangling the promise of a grandchild and the threat of loneliness, she could trick the engineer into demolishing his own fortress. I picked up the paper. I folded it neatly in half. Then I folded it again. I placed it next to my water glass. You want me to sign over my house? I asked. It is just paperwork, Thad, she said dismissively. It stays in the family, and you want control of my money. To help you, she insisted. To make sure the baby has what it needs. The baby, I repeated. Yes, she said, patting her stomach. Your grandson. or granddaughter? We find out next week. I nodded slowly. I took a long sip of my water. I set the glass down with a solid thud. You are very good at this, Paige, I said. The acting, the tears, the costume. It is very convincing. For a moment I almost believed you were actually sorry. I am sorry, she protested. No, you are not, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You are broke, and you are a liar. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean that there is no baby, I said. Darius looked up, his eyes wide. Dad, what are you saying? I am saying, Darius, that your wife is a biological impossibility. I turned my gaze to Paige. She went pale. She knew. She knew that I knew. 3 years ago, I continued my voice low and precise enough to cut glass. I paid the premium for your health insurance policy. It was a platinum plan. I wanted to make sure you were covered. Because I paid the bill, I received the explanation of benefit statements. I leaned in closer. On May 12th, 3 years ago, you underwent a laparoscopic bilateral salpingectomy. For those who do not speak medical terminology, that means you had your fallopian tubes removed. Not tied. Removed. You cannot get pregnant naturally, Paige. It is physically impossible. The silence at the table was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of their lungs. Darius turned to look at his wife. His face was a mask of confusion and horror. He did not know. She had lied to him too. Paige, he whispered, is that true? She stammered. She tried to find a lie, but there was nowhere to go. The medical fact was a wall she could not climb. I can explain, she choked out. It was a medical necessity. I didn't want to worry you. You told me you were pregnant last week, Darius said, his voice rising. You told me that is why we needed the money. You told me that is why we had to get the house. I watched the alliance fracture. I watched the foundation of their marriage crack under the weight of the truth. Thad. Please, Paige hissed, turning back to me, desperation clawing at her throat. Do not do this. I am not doing anything, I said. I am just stating facts. You are not pregnant. You were never pregnant. You used a non-existent child as a weapon to extort money from me and to manipulate your husband. You lied to the public, you lied to the court, and you lied to the man sitting next to you. I picked up the folded legal document. I tore it in half. Then I tore it again. There will be no trust, I said. There will be no power of attorney. There will be no reconciliation. I stood up. I picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. I have this entire conversation on tape, I told them. I have you admitting that the video was a leverage tactic. I have you admitting that the guardianship was a ploy for money. And I have you lying about a pregnancy to coerce a signature. I looked at Darius. He was slumped in the booth, broken. He was realizing that his entire rebellion, his entire war against his father had been fought for a lie. You have a choice, Darius, I said. You can stay with the woman who played you for a fool, or you can walk away. But do not look to me for salvation. I am done saving you. I threw a $20 bill on the table. It was enough for my water. Enjoy your dinner, I said. I assume you can pay for it this time. I walked away. I did not look back. I heard Paige sobbing behind me, but this time the sound brought me no guilt. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut on the leg of the wolf. I walked out into the evening air. The city lights were coming on. I felt a strange sense of lightness. The secret was out. The lie was exposed. They had tried to use a child to bind me, but they had only used a phantom. I got into my car and drove home. As I drove, I thought about the look on Darius's face. It was the look of a man falling from a great height. I had built the bridge that held him up for 32 years. Tonight, I had watched him burn it down and fall into the chasm below. Phase 2 was complete. They were turning on each other. The money was gone. The lies were exposed. Now it was time for the final blow. It was time to show them who Hank and Brenda really were. It was time to reveal the parasites for what they truly were. I pulled into my driveway. The new locks gleamed in the moonlight. I was safe. I was alone. And I was winning. The morning after the dinner at the Capitol Grill, silence returned to my home, but it was not the peace of solitude. It was the quiet before the detonation of a landmine. I sat in my study, surrounded by the hum of my servers and the faint smell of old paper. The courier arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with red security tape. It was from Marcus Vance, my private investigator. I placed the envelope on my desk. I did not open it immediately. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and hot. I looked at the package. It represented the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to the question that had plagued me since Easter. Why were they so desperate? Why did they need to move in immediately? Why did they react with such violence when I said no? It was not just about saving money on a hotel, it was about survival. I slit the tape with my letter opener. I slid the contents out onto the mahogany surface. It was a dossier thick with photographs, court documents, and financial records. The first photograph showed Hank and Brenda standing in front of a modest ranch house in Florida. The house was a ruin. The roof had collapsed and there was water damage visible on the stucco walls. I picked up the summary report. Hank and Brenda were not just down on their luck. They were fugitives. 6 months ago, they had filed a massive insurance claim for water damage and structural failure, alleging that a sinkhole had opened up beneath their foundation. They claimed the house was a total loss. The insurance company paid out $300,000. But insurance investigators are like engineers. They understand that structures do not lie. A follow-up investigation revealed that the sinkhole was man-made. Hank had used high-pressure water pumps to erode the soil beneath his own slab. He had deliberately sabotaged the foundation of his own home to commit fraud. By the time the authorities issued a warrant for their arrest, the money was gone. They had cashed the check and vanished. They were currently wanted in the state of Florida for insurance fraud, grand theft, and conspiracy. There were active bench warrants for their arrest for failure to appear in court. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces slammed into place with the precision of a steel trap. They did not want to move into my East Wing because they missed their daughter. They did not want to live with me because they were temporarily embarrassed financially. They needed a hideout. They needed a physical address that was not connected to their names so they could lay low while the heat died down. They needed a fortress where they could disappear behind the walls of a respectable citizen. And I was the perfect patsy. A wealthy old man with a big house and a reputation for privacy. If they had established residency in my home, they would have been invisible. They would have used my address to dodge process servers. And if the police ever came knocking, they would have claimed they were just visiting elderly relatives. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. If I had let them in, if I had allowed them to stay even for a week, I could have been charged with harboring fugitives. I could have been implicated in their conspiracy. They were willing to drag me into a felony just to save their own skins. But the dossier held a darker secret. I turned the page. Vance had included a section titled Known Associates in Communications. There was a printout of an email chain. It was dated 2 weeks before Easter. The sender was Hank. The recipient was Darius. I put on my reading glasses. I needed to see this clearly. I needed to be sure. Hank wrote Darius, "The investigators are sniffing around the old address. We need to move by the 1st of the month. We cannot stay in the motel anymore. They scan IDs. We need to get into your dad's place. It is the only secure location." And below that was the reply from my son. Darius wrote, "I am working on him, Hank. He is stubborn. Paige and I are going to push hard at Easter dinner. If he says no, we will just move you in anyway while he is asleep and claim squatters' rights if we have to. Just hold tight. Do not get pulled over." I read the email 3 times. I read it until the words blurred together. Darius knew. My son knew that his in-laws were criminals. He knew they were wanted by the law. He knew that bringing them into my house put me in legal jeopardy. And he did not care. He was actively conspiring to turn my home into a safe house for felons. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the manicured lawn, the oak trees, the quiet street. I had built this life on the principles of law and order. I had followed every code, every regulation, every statute. And my son was willing to burn it all down because he was too weak to say no to his wife. The betrayal I felt before was emotional. This was different. This was existential. Darius had not just been selfish, he had been dangerous. He had placed a target on my back. I went back to the desk. I looked at the mugshots of Hank and Brenda attached to the file. They looked younger in the photos, smug and arrogant. They were smiling the smile of people who think they are smarter than the system. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for Officer Hernandez. I could end this right now. I could call the police and tell them where to find Hank and Brenda. I could give them the motel address. I could show them the emails proving Darius was an accessory. They would all be arrested within the hour. But I hesitated. If I called the police now, it would be over too quickly. Hank and Brenda would go to jail, yes, but Darius would play the victim. He would claim he didn't know the extent of their crimes. He would claim he was manipulated. Paige would cry to the media that I was a vindictive old man who sent her parents to prison because of a family dispute. The narrative would still be messy. And more importantly, Darius would not learn. He would blame the system. He would blame me. He would never take responsibility for the fact that he chose a criminal enterprise over his own father. No, I needed to wait. I needed the pressure to build. Hank and Brenda were desperate. They had no money, the credit cards were dead. They couldn't use their own identities to get a new hotel room or rent an apartment. They were trapped in a city where they were rapidly running out of resources. When rats are trapped, they do not surrender. They bite. They panic. They make mistakes. I wanted Darius to feel the weight of his choice. I wanted him to see who these people really were when the facade crumbled. I wanted him to be the one to realize that he had tied himself to a sinking ship. I gathered the papers and put them back in the envelope. I walked over to the wall safe hidden behind the portrait of Etta. I spun the dial. I placed the dossier inside next to the hard drive and the audio recordings. I had the nuclear option. I had the button that could send them all to prison for years. But I would not press it yet. I would let them starve a little longer. I would let the fear of capture eat away at their sanity. I closed the safe and spun the lock. My phone pinged. It was a notification from my security system. Motion detected at the perimeter gate. I pulled up the camera feed on my monitor. It was a black SUV. It was idling by the entrance. The windows were tinted, but I could see the driver. It was Hank. He was watching the house. He was casing the property. He looked desperate. He looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. He was talking on his phone, gesturing wildly. I zoomed in. I couldn't hear him, but I could read the body language. He was angry. He was frantic. He knew I had cut off the money. He knew he couldn't go back to Florida. He knew he couldn't stay at the St. Regis. He needed funds, and he needed them now. I watched as he drove away, his tires screeching on the asphalt. He wasn't leaving. He was retreating to regroup. He would be back. And next time, he wouldn't just sit at the gate. I sat back in my chair. The engineer in me began to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a desperate man's morality. Hank was a fraudster, which meant he was a coward, but he was also cornered. Darius was weak, which meant he was malleable. Paige was greedy, which meant she was the catalyst. They would come for me. Not with lawyers this time, not with social workers. They would come for the only thing they understood: value. I looked at the collection of vintage Rolex watches displayed in the glass case on my bookshelf. They were worth $500,000. They were portable. They were untraceable if sold on the black market. I knew Darius had always admired them. I knew he knew the combination to the display case because I had shown him once years ago when I thought I was raising a successor. A plan began to form in my mind, a trap within a trap. I would not call the police to report a past crime. I would invite them to commit a new one. I would give them the opportunity to cross the final line from civil dispute to criminal felony. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Vance. "I need you to adjust the sensors in the basement window," he replied instantly. "Consider it done." I turned off the monitor. I sat in the dark listening to the silence of the house. I was not afraid of the thieves. I was waiting for them. I was the spider sitting in the center of the web, feeling the vibrations of the prey approaching. And I knew that when they arrived, I would not be the one who was surprised. I thought of Darius one last time. I thought of the boy I taught to ride a bike. I thought of the man who conspired to harbor fugitives. The boy was gone. The man was an enemy. And tonight I would treat him as such. 2 days later, the desperation I had calculated finally reached its boiling point. My security team intercepted a text message sent from Paige to Darius at 3 in the afternoon. They were holed up in a motel off the interstate, the kind of place that charges by the hour and smells of industrial cleaner masking decay. The St. Regis had evicted them when the credit card declined, and Hank had refused to dip into his flight fund to cover the bill. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats do not think they react. The text read simply, "Get the watches. We can fence them in Miami. Do it tonight or I am leaving you." It was the ultimatum I had been waiting for. Paige knew about my collection. She knew that the vintage Daytonas and Submariners in my study were worth more than the house she grew up in. She saw them not as horological history, but as a winning lottery ticket that I was selfishly refusing to cash. She had convinced Darius that taking them was not stealing. In her twisted logic, it was merely claiming his inheritance early. It was a victimless crime because surely the old man had insurance. I sat in the dark of my living room watching the monitors. I had sent the staff home. I had turned off the perimeter lights. To an outside observer, the house looked dormant, a sleeping giant, vulnerable to attack. But inside, the digital nervous system of the building was humming. Vance had rigged the basement window just as I asked. It was the one weakness in the house's armor, a small casement window near the laundry room that I used to leave cracked open for ventilation in the summer. Darius knew about it. As a teenager, he had used it to sneak out to parties and sneak back in before dawn. He thought it was his secret loophole. He did not know that I had always known. Tonight that window was unlocked. It was the cheese in the mousetrap. But just inside the frame, crossing the threshold of the basement floor, was a laser tripwire connected directly to a silent alarm at the precinct. There would be no sirens. There would be no warning. Just a silent digital scream that would bring the wolf hunters to the door. At 2 a.m., a dark sedan rolled down the street. It did not pull into the driveway. It parked 2 houses down in the shadows of the neighbor's hedge. I zoomed in with the exterior camera. It was a rental car, cheap and nondescript. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out dressed in black, a hoodie pulled low over his face. He moved with the hesitant gait of a man who knows he is doing wrong but is too weak to stop himself. It was Darius. I watched my son creep across the lawn he had played on as a child. I watched him dodge the motion sensor lights that I had deliberately deactivated for this specific path. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was navigating the minefield. He did not realize the minefield was guiding him. He reached the side of the house. He crouched by the basement window. He pushed against the frame. It slid open silently thanks to the fresh grease I had applied that afternoon. He slipped inside feet first. On my monitor, a red light blinked. The silent alarm was triggered. The signal was out. The police were en route. ETA 4 minutes. I switched the camera feed to the interior basement view. Darius landed softly on the concrete floor. He pulled a flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the washing machine and the shelves of old paint cans. He paused, listening. He was terrified. I could see the tremor in his hand as he swept the light around the room. He moved toward the stairs. He crept up to the main floor. I sat in the study on the second floor, the door slightly ajar. I could hear the floorboards creak downstairs. I knew exactly which board it was, the one in the hallway outside the kitchen. I had meant to fix it for years. Now it was an early warning system. He was heading for the study. He was coming for the watches. I checked the GPS tracker on the police units. They were turning onto my street. Silent approach. Lights off. Darius reached the study door. He pushed it open. He swept his flashlight across the room until it landed on the glass display case. The gold and steel of the watches glinted in the beam. He exhaled a shaky breath. He moved quickly now, driven by adrenaline and greed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pry bar. He was going to force the lock. He didn't even know the combination anymore, or perhaps he just didn't care to try. He jammed the metal bar into the gap of the glass door. The sound of cracking wood was loud in the silence. He leveraged it. The lock snapped. The door swung open. He reached in, grabbing the watches by the handful, stuffing them into the pockets of his hoodie. A 1970s GMT Master, a rare Milgauss, pieces of history disappearing into the pouch of a thief. Outside, blue lights washed over the walls silently, no sirens, just the sudden strobing illumination of justice. Darius froze. He saw the lights reflecting off the glass case. He turned toward the window and saw the police cruisers blocking the driveway. He panicked. He dropped the pry bar. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. He turned to run back the way he came back to the basement, back to the hole he had crawled out of. But it was too late. The front door crashed open. The battering ram hit the oak with a thunderous boom that shook the house. Police, federal agents, get on the ground. The shouting was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy boots thundered into the foyer. Flashlight beams cut through the air like lightsabers, crossing and blinding. Darius scrambled into the hallway. He ran right into the wall of tactical gear and drawn weapons. "Show me your hands. Drop to your knees," he screamed. It was a high-pitched sound of pure terror. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" I stood up from my chair. I walked out of the study and onto the landing of the grand staircase. I looked down into the foyer. Darius was on his knees, his hands clasped behind his head. 3 officers had their weapons trained on him. One was moving in to cuff him. His hood had fallen back. His face was pressed against the floorboards. He was sobbing. "Dad," he screamed into the wood. "Dad, tell them I live here." The officer yanked his arms back and snapped the handcuffs on. The metallic ratcheting sound echoed through the high-ceilinged space. I walked slowly down the stairs. My hand trailed along the banister. I was wearing my silk robe and slippers, looking every inch the disturbed homeowner woken by an intruder. Officer Hernandez looked up. She lowered her weapon when she saw me. "Mr. King, are you all right?" she asked. We got the silent alarm. We caught him in the act. They hauled Darius to his feet. He looked up at me. His face was streaked with tears and snot. His eyes were wide, desperate pleading. He looked like the boy who used to scrape his knees and come running for a bandage. But he wasn't that boy. He was a man with my watches in his pocket and betrayal in his heart. "Dad, please," Darius begged. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them I am allowed to be here. I was just getting my stuff." The officer reached into Darius's pocket and pulled out the watches. He held them up. The gold gleamed under the tactical lights. "Is this his stuff, Mr. King?" the officer asked. I stopped on the bottom step. I looked at the watches. I looked at the broken pry bar lying on the floor of my study, visible through the open door. I looked at the window he had forced. Then I looked at my son. I looked for a trace of the child I had raised. I looked for the young man I had sent to college. I looked for any spark of honor or dignity. I found none. I saw only a stranger, a desperate, greedy stranger who would sell his own father for a night in a hotel. I looked the officer in the eye. "I do not know this man," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as the grave. Darius gasped as if I had struck him. "Dad." "No, it's me. It's Darius." This man broke into my home. I continued ignoring his screams. He bypassed my security. He damaged my property. And he was caught stealing valuables worth over $500,000. I want to press charges, full extent of the law, burglary, grand larceny, trespassing. "But he is your son," Officer Hernandez said quietly, checking to make sure I understood the gravity of my words. "My son died a long time ago," I said. "This is just a thief with a familiar face. Take him away." Darius began to struggle. He screamed. He cursed. He called me names that no father should ever hear. He called me a monster. He called me evil. He called me selfish. They dragged him out the door. He kicked and thrashed, but the officers were stronger. They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. I watched through the open door as the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in a cage of his own making. I stood in the foyer alone again. The officers began to process the scene, taking photos of the broken lock, the open window, the pry bar. They bagged the watches as evidence. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Paige. "Did you get them? Let me know when you are clear." I looked at the message. She was waiting. She was sitting in that motel room waiting for her payday. She didn't know that her pawn had been captured. She didn't know the game was over. I did not reply. I let her wait. The silence would be her first punishment. The knock on her motel door that was coming next would be her second. I turned to Officer Hernandez. "There is an accomplice," I said. He was acting under instruction. "I have the text messages to prove conspiracy." Her eyes widened. "Who?" "His wife," I said. "Paige King. She is at the Motel 6 on the interstate, room 114. Go get her." As the second squad car peeled out of the driveway, sirens finally wailing, I walked back upstairs. I went into my study. I picked up the picture frame that lay face down on my desk. It was a photo of Darius at his graduation, smiling, holding his diploma. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I opened the trash can and let it drop. Phase 3 was complete. The trap had sprung. The rat was caught. And now the nest was about to be burned to the ground. The visiting room of the Fulton County Jail smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale sweat. It was a smell I recognized from construction sites where the portable toilets had not been cleaned, a scent of containment and waste. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor. A thick pane of plexiglass separated me from the empty chair on the other side. I placed my hands on the counter. They were steady. I was not here as a father. I was here as a negotiator offering terms of surrender. The door on the inmate side buzzed open. Darius walked in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His wrists were shackled to his waist. His ankles were chained. He shuffled toward the chair, his head down. He looked 10 years older than he had the night before. His face was swollen from crying. His hair was matted. He sat down and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed holes of misery. He picked up the phone receiver. I did the same. Dad, he croaked, his voice tinny through the speaker. You have to get me out of here. It is terrible in here. I am scared. I looked at him. I did not feel pity. I felt the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a gangrenous limb. You broke into my house, Darius, I said, my voice flat. You committed a felony. This is where felons go. It was Paige, he sobbed, leaning his forehead against the glass. She made me do it. She said we needed the money. She said you owed us. She said you would never press charges. She forced me, Dad. I didn't want to do it. I watched him crumble. It was his standard defense mechanism. Whenever life got hard, he pointed a finger at someone else. It was the teacher's fault he failed math. It was the coach's fault he didn't make the team. It was my fault he didn't have money. Now it was Paige's fault he was a thief. She did not hold a gun to your head, I said. You picked up the pry bar. You broke the lock. You put the watches in your pocket. But I was desperate, he pleaded. We had nothing. You had nothing because you spent everything I replied, and you spent it on things I didn't know about until yesterday. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket and held it up to the glass. It was a printout from the hard drive clone. It was a betting log from an offshore gambling site. I know about the poker, Darius, I said. I know about the sports betting. I know you lost $40,000 in the last 6 months alone. That is why you lost your job, isn't it? You were gambling on company time. You were embezzling from petty cash to cover your losses. Darius went pale. He stared at the paper. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He thought his secret was buried deep in the dark web. He didn't realize I had shone a spotlight on his entire digital life. You are an addict, I said. And Paige is an enabler who uses your addiction to control you. She spends your money, and when you run out, she points you toward me. I put the paper down. I am going to offer you a deal, I said. Darius looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying candle. A deal. I will drop the charges, I said. I will tell the district attorney that I do not wish to prosecute. I will say it was a family misunderstanding. I will pay for your bail. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, he wept. I promise I will pay you back. I promise. I raised my hand to stop him. There are conditions, I said. 3 of them. They are non-negotiable. He nodded eagerly. Anything. Anything. Condition 1, I said, holding up a finger. You will file for divorce immediately. Today. My lawyer has the papers ready. You will cut all contact with Paige. No texts, no calls, no letters. She is a cancer and you are going to cut her out. Darius hesitated. His eyes darted to the side. Condition 2. I continued. You will tell the police exactly where Hank and Brenda are hiding. I know they are in town. I know they are waiting for the money from the watches. You will give up their location, and you will testify against them regarding the insurance fraud conspiracy. Darius swallowed hard. He looked sick. Condition 3. I finished. You will enter an inpatient rehabilitation facility for gambling addiction. I have already selected one in Arizona. It is a 12-month program. It is locked down. No phone, no internet. You will go there directly from this jail. You will complete the program. If you leave early, the deal is void and I will refile the charges. I leaned forward. Those are the terms. Divorce the parasite snitch on the grifters and fix your brain. Do this and you have a chance at a life. Refuse and you stay here for 10 to 15 years. Darius stared at me. The hope in his eyes curdled into something ugly. He looked at the paper on the table. He looked at the shackles on his wrists. He was weighing his options. Freedom with hard work or prison with his pride. For a moment I thought he would take it. I saw the logic fighting through the fog of his weakness. But then I saw the other thing. The thing Paige had planted in him. The deep-seated resentment of a son who felt he was owed the world. I cannot divorce her, he whispered. She is my wife. She is pregnant. She is not pregnant, I snapped. I told you that at the restaurant. She had her tubes removed. She is lying to you, Darius. She has always been lying to you. She told me that was a mistake, he said, his voice rising, gaining a frantic defensive edge. She said the medical records were wrong. She said you forged them to break us up. She loves me, Dad. She is the only one who understands me. You just want to control me. You have always wanted to control me. I looked at him with disbelief. He was choosing the lie. He was clinging to the fantasy because the reality that he was a fool was too painful to accept. She sent you to rob me, I reminded him. She is in a motel room right now, probably packing her bags to leave you because you failed. No, he shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. She is waiting for me. We are a team. You are just a jealous old man who wants everyone to be as miserable as you are. You want to ship me off to Arizona so you can forget about me. You want to lock me up in a rehab center like a child. I am trying to save your life, I said, my voice rising for the first time. I do not want your saving, he spat. I do not want your deals. I do not want your conditions. You think you can buy everyone. You think you can dictate how I live just because you have money. Well, you cannot buy me. You are already bought, I said. Paige bought you with lies and sex, and you sold yourself for cheap. Go to hell, he screamed. Go to hell, Thad. I would rather rot in here than be your puppet. I am not snitching on her parents. I am not divorcing my wife. And I am certainly not going to some rehab prison just because you say so. He stood up, his chains rattling violently. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with the false courage of martyrdom. He felt brave. He felt loyal. He did not realize he was just being suicidal. I looked at him one last time. I looked for the son I loved. He was not there. This was a stranger, a hostile entity programmed by an enemy. I stood up. I picked up the gambling log. I folded it and put it back in my pocket. Very well, I said. I hung up the receiver. Darius was still shouting through the glass, though I could not hear him anymore. He was gesturing wildly, pointing at me, pointing at the door. He looked like a man drowning who pushes away the life preserver because he dislikes the color orange. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the heavy steel door. I buzzed for the guard. As the door opened, I looked back. Darius had slumped back into his chair. He had his head in his hands. The bravado was gone. The reality of the cell was returning. He had made his choice. He had chosen the sinking ship. He had chosen the parasites. He had chosen to be a felon rather than a man. I walked out of the jail and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted sweet. I pulled out my phone and called Anika. He refused the deal, I told her. I'm sorry, Thad, she said. Do not be, I replied, unlocking my car. It clarifies things. Proceed with the prosecution, full charges, and send the gambling records to the DA. It goes to motive. I got into my car and started the engine. I did not look back at the jail. My son was in there, but my obligation to him was not. I had offered him a ladder. He had used it to try and hit me. Now he could stay in the hole. I drove away, leaving the wreckage behind. Phase 4 was coming. The trial. And if Darius thought I was controlling before he was about to see what I looked like when I stopped holding back. The family court of Fulton County was a theater of misery where the scripts were written in tears and the tickets cost billable hours. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Anika Patel. My suit was pressed, my posture was rigid, and my face was a mask of stone. Across the aisle sat Paige. She had chosen her costume carefully for this performance. She wore a modest white blouse buttoned to the neck and a gray skirt that fell below her knees. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a librarian or a nun, not the woman who had shattered a crystal goblet against my skull. Next to her sat her attorney, a man named Mr. Blackwood. He was a court-appointed lawyer because she had no money for a private firm, but he was loud and aggressive, compensating for his lack of fees with volume. He stood up to make his opening statement, pacing back and forth in front of the bench, his voice booming off the mahogany paneling. Your Honor, he began, gesturing wildly toward me. We are here today because a wealthy, powerful man is using the legal system to bully a defenseless pregnant woman. Mr. King is a tyrant. He rules his home with an iron fist. When his son and daughter-in-law fell on hard times, he did not offer them shelter, he offered them eviction. He threw them out into the street in the middle of the night. He paused for effect, looking at the judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, who peered over her reading glasses with an expression of mild boredom. Mr. King claims he was assaulted. Blackwood continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But look at him. He is a large man. My client is petite. She is with child. Are we really to believe that she attacked him unprovoked? Or is it more likely that in a fit of rage over his cruelty he injured himself to frame her? Or perhaps he became aggressive, and she raised a hand to protect her unborn baby. I listened to the lies. They washed over me like dirty water. I did not flinch. I did not object. I let him paint his picture. I let him build his house of cards. Paige sat with her head bowed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She was shaking her shoulders, mimicking the silent sobs of the heartbroken. It was a good performance. If I did not know the truth, I might have felt sorry for her. Mr. Blackwood called Paige to the stand. She walked up slowly, holding the railing as if she were frail. She swore to tell the truth. "Paige," he asked softly, "did you attack your father-in-law?" "No," she whispered into the microphone. "I would never hurt anyone. I was begging him to let my parents stay. He got so angry. He started yelling. He threw a plate. I was scared. I raised my hand to cover my face and he just went crazy." She looked at the judge, tears streaming down her face. "He cut himself, Your Honor. He smashed a glass against the table and cut his own head just so he could call the police. He told me he would destroy us. He said he had enough money to buy the law." Judge Holloway looked at me. Her eyes were hard. Accusations of judicial corruption did not sit well with her. "Is that all Mr. Blackwood asked?" "Yes," Paige said, sniffing. "I just want to be safe. I want him to leave us alone." Annika stood up. She did not cross-examine Paige. She did not ask her to clarify her lies. She simply looked at the judge. "Your Honor?" Annika said, her voice cool and crisp. "The defense has presented a very moving story. However, we prefer to rely on objective reality. We have evidence that directly contradicts every word the defendant just said." She gestured to the large monitor mounted on the wall to the left of the witness stand. "We would like to enter into Evidence Exhibit A. This is security camera footage from the dining room of Mr. King's residence recorded on the night of the incident. It includes high-fidelity audio." Mr. Blackwood jumped up. "Objection. We have not verified the authenticity of this video," overruled Judge Holloway said, leaning forward. "Play the tape." The screen flickered to life. The courtroom darkened slightly. The video started. It showed the dining room. It showed the Easter dinner. It showed me sitting calmly at the head of the table. It showed Paige standing up, her face twisted in a snarl that looked nothing like the demure woman currently sitting in the witness box. The audio filled the courtroom. "You are a monster," Paige's recorded voice screamed, shrill and hateful. "You are a selfish old man." The video showed me calmly refusing her request. It showed Darius sitting silently. It showed the escalation. And then it happened. The moment of violence was frozen in high definition. Paige grabbed the glass. There was no self-defense. There was no fear. There was only pure, unadulterated aggression. She wound up and threw the glass with the precision of a baseball pitcher. The sound of the impact echoed through the speakers, a sickening wet thud followed by the crash of shattering crystal. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff flinched. The video continued. It showed me bleeding. It showed me leaving. It showed Paige not crying, not trembling, but standing there panting with rage. And then came the second part of the video, the part Mr. Blackwood had not anticipated. The video showed the aftermath. It showed me walking out the door. And it showed Paige turning to the mirror in the hallway. "Look at this," she said on the recording, her voice clear. She reached into her purse. She pulled out the tube of purple lipstick. "I am going to ruin him," she laughed. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as she drew the fake bruise on her arm. They watched her smudge it with her thumb. They watched her practice her crying face in the mirror. "This is going to look so good on camera," the recorded Paige said with a smirk. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Every eye in the room turned to Paige. She was frozen in the witness stand. Her face had drained of all color. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. The librarian costume suddenly looked like what it was, a disguise. Judge Holloway slowly turned her head to look at Paige. The judge's face was no longer bored. It was furious. The kind of cold judicial fury that ends careers and destroys lives. "Mrs. King," the judge said, her voice low and dangerous. "Did you just lie to this court under oath?" Paige stammered. That video, it's edited. It's a deep fake. He has money. He paid someone to make it." Mr. Blackwood sat down. He physically distanced himself from his client. He knew when a ship was sinking and he was not going down with it. Annika stood up again. "Your Honor, we also have the metadata for the file verified by an independent forensic expert. The video is authentic. Furthermore, regarding the defendant's claim of pregnancy, which she used to justify her emotional state, we have subpoenaed her medical records." Annika held up a document. This is a record of a bilateral salpingectomy performed 3 years ago. The defendant is physically incapable of being pregnant. Her entire testimony is perjury. Judge Holloway slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Enough, she barked. She looked at Paige with disgust. I have sat on this bench for 20 years, the judge said. I have seen liars. I have seen manipulators. But I have never seen someone come into my courtroom and perform such a grotesque mockery of justice. You assaulted this man in his own home. You fabricated evidence to frame him. You lied about a pregnancy to garner sympathy. And then you sat there and lied to my face. Paige began to sob for real this time. It was the ugly crying of someone who knows they are trapped. Please, she wailed. I didn't mean it. Stand up, Judge Holloway commanded. Paige stood up trembling. I am granting the petitioner's request for a permanent restraining order, the judge declared. It will remain in effect for 5 years, the maximum allowed by law. You are to have no contact with Mr. King. You are to stay 500 yards away from his home, his place of business, and his person. If you violate this order, you will go to jail immediately. Do you understand? Yes, Paige whispered. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am holding you in contempt of court for perjury. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office. You lied under oath, Mrs. King. That is a felony. You entered this courtroom seeking to destroy a man's reputation, and you have only succeeded in destroying your own. Bailiff, take her into custody for processing on the contempt charge. The bailiff moved forward. He took Paige's arm. She looked at Darius, who was not there. She looked at her lawyer, who was packing his briefcase. She looked at me. I looked back at her. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at her with the indifference of a mountain looking at a passing storm. Thad, please, she begged as the bailiff pulled her toward the side door. Help me. I turned my head and looked at Anika. We are done here, I said. The bailiff led Paige away. The door closed behind her, cutting off her sobs. Judge Holloway looked at me. Mr. King, I apologize that you had to endure this. The order is effective immediately. You are safe. Thank you. Your Honor, I said. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was bright and crowded with people waiting for their own tragedies to unfold. I walked through them feeling like a ghost. I had won. The legal shield was in place. Paige was branded a liar by the court. She was facing criminal charges for perjury. Her credibility was ash. But as I walked out into the sunlight, I felt a strange hollowness. I had dismantled the threat, but the victory was clinical. It was a surgical removal of a tumor. I took out my phone. I had one more message to send. One more loose end to tie up. I texted Darius. Paige has been arrested for perjury. The restraining order is permanent. She lied about the baby. She lied about the abuse. The court saw the video. It is over. I hit send. I did not wait for a reply. I walked to my car. I had cut off the head of the snake, but the body was still thrashing. Hank and Brenda were still out there, and Darius was still in jail refusing to see reason. Phase 4 was complete. The legal war was won. Now came the public execution of their lies. I had to destroy the fake narrative she had planted online. I had to make sure that everyone knew who she really was, so she could never hurt anyone else again. I drove away from the courthouse, my eyes on the road, my mind already calculating the next move. The pregnancy hoax was next. It was time to show the world the medical records. It was time to finish what she started. You would think that being arrested for perjury and held in contempt of court would be a rock bottom for most people. You would assume that standing before a judge and being called a liar would induce a moment of silence or perhaps a retreat into shame. But Paige was not a normal person. She was a creature of the digital age, a narcissist whose oxygen was attention regardless of whether it was positive or negative. She had been released on bail paid for by selling her engagement ring, a piece of jewelry I had bought for Darius 3 years ago. Instead of using her freedom to find a lawyer or a job, she went back to the Motel 6, set up her ring light, and pressed the broadcast button. I was sitting in my office reviewing the security logs when the alert came in. Paige was live. The title of the stream was The Truth About the Corrupt Judge and My Medical Emergency. I clicked the link. She was sitting on the floor of the motel room, leaning against the beige wall. She looked disheveled. Her mascara was smeared. She was clutching her stomach with both hands, rocking back and forth. Guys, she whispered into the microphone, her voice raspy. I cannot believe what happened today. The system is rigged. That judge—" She paused, looking around as if checking for spies. "That judge is on Thad King's payroll." I saw them winking at each other. He paid her off to silence me. The viewer count was climbing. 5,000, 10,000. The internet loves a conspiracy theory, and Paige was feeding them red meat. And now she continued, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I think I am losing the baby. The stress, the way the bailiff grabbed me. I am having cramps, I am bleeding. And they won't let me go to the hospital because they took my ID. They are trying to kill my child." The comment stream was a blur of outrage. People were calling for the judge to be disbarred. They were calling for my arrest. They were sending her money through the donation button. Cash App notifications were popping up on the screen every second. She was monetizing her own fictional tragedy. I picked up my phone and called Annika. "She is doing it again," I said. "She is slandering a sitting judge and she is faking a miscarriage live on the internet. I am watching it." Annika replied, her voice tight. "She has waived her right to medical privacy by making her condition the subject of a public fundraising campaign and by accusing the court of causing physical harm. She has opened the door." "Thad, walk through it," I said. "We have the transcript from this morning's hearing," Annika said. "It is public record now that the judge unsealed the perjury finding. It cites the specific medical evidence used to prove the lie. Release it, I ordered. Release it all. Post it on the firm's official press page. Tag the blogs. Tag the news outlets. If she wants a trial by public opinion, let us give the public the exhibits." I hung up. I watched the screen. Paige was now sobbing loudly, holding up a tissue that she claimed had blood on it. It looked suspiciously like ketchup, or the same lipstick she had used for the bruise, but the low resolution of the camera hid the details. "Please," she begged the camera. "I need help. I need legal fees. I need to save this pregnancy." 10 minutes passed. The donation counter was up to $3,000. She was winning. She was scamming thousands of people in real time. Then the tide turned. It started with a single comment pinned by a user named Legal Eagle Watch. "Hey guys, check the link. The court transcript just dropped. She isn't pregnant. She had her tubes removed 3 years ago. Paige didn't see it at first. She was too busy thanking a user for a $50 donation." Then another comment appeared, and another. "Liar. You are sterilized. What about the salpingectomy page? Show us the ultrasound." "Scammer." The stream of hearts and supportive emojis turned into a wall of angry red faces and vomit icons. The chat moved so fast it became a blur of hate. Paige squinted at the screen. She saw the word tubes. She saw the word medical records. Her eyes widened. She stopped rocking. She stopped crying. The pain in her stomach miraculously vanished as the panic in her mind took over. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "That is fake." He forged it. But the internet is a hive mind. Within seconds, someone had screenshotted the document Annika released. It was the official court record stamped by the clerk of Fulton County. It detailed the testimony. It detailed the medical evidence from her own insurance provider. It quoted the judge calling her a perjurer. The donation stopped instantly. Then the brands woke up. Paige was a micro-influencer. She made her living promoting weight loss teas, fast fashion, and cheap cosmetics. These companies do not care about morality, but they care deeply about liability. They do not want to be associated with a woman who fakes a pregnancy loss for profit. I watched as her notification bar at the top of the screen began to fill with emails. Because she was screen sharing to show donation alerts, the audience could see the subject lines of her incoming mail. From Skinny Tea Co., immediate termination of partnership. From Luxlash, breach of contract notice. From Fashion Nova, cease and desist. Paige saw them too. She gasped. She tried to swipe them away, but they kept coming. Her income stream was drying up in real time. The sponsors were fleeing the burning building. "No," she whispered. "No, wait. Let me explain." But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was absolute. The medical procedure she had undergone was irreversible. It was a biological fact that stood like a stone wall against her wave of lies. The comments became vicious. People who had donated 5 minutes ago were now demanding refunds. They were threatening to report her to the FBI for wire fraud. They were doxing her location. "She is at the Motel 6 off I-20, someone typed. Room 114. I recognized the curtains. Paige read the comment. She looked at the door of her room. Terror washed over her face. She was no longer the star of her own drama. She was the target of a mob she had created. She reached for the camera. Her hand was shaking so badly she knocked the light over. The room plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the harsh glow of the laptop screen. "I have to go," she cried. "I have to go!" The stream cut to black. I sat in my office, the silence returning once again. I refreshed the page. The video was gone, deleted. But the internet never forgets. Clips of her reading the comments were already circulating on Twitter. The screenshots of the court documents were trending. She had wanted to be famous. She had wanted the world to know her name. Now they did. She was the woman who faked a baby for money. She was the woman who lied about abuse. She was a pariah. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Darius. He was still in jail. He must have traded his commissary access for phone time. "Dad," he wrote, "they are showing Paige on the TV in the day room. They are saying she isn't pregnant. Is it true?" I looked at the text. Even now, after everything, he still had to ask. He still needed me to confirm reality for him because he had lived in her fantasy for so long. "It is true, Darius," I replied. "It has always been true." He did not reply. I closed my laptop. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. I had stripped them of their home. I had stripped them of their money. I had stripped them of their lies. Paige was ruined. She would never make another dime online. Her reputation was ash. But the war was not over. Hank was still out there. He was a cornered animal. He had seen his daughter destroyed. He had seen his meal ticket go to jail. He had seen his safe harbor evaporate. He was the volatile element. He was the one with nothing left to lose. And men with nothing to lose are dangerous. I checked the security monitors. The perimeter was clear, but the night was dark. I knew he was coming. I could feel it. He wouldn't come with lawyers or cameras. He would come with violence. He would come for revenge. I finished my tea. I checked the locks. I armed the system. Phase 5 was approaching. The physical confrontation. The last gasp of the parasite. I went to the front hall closet and took out my old baseball bat. It was a Louisville Slugger heavy wood scarred from years of use. I placed it by the front door, not because I wanted to use it, but because a prepared man is a safe man. I went upstairs to bed. I slept with one eye open. The storm was almost over, but the final thunderclap was yet to come. It was 3 a.m. when the silence of the cul-de-sac was shattered by the screaming of an engine pushed to its limit. I was awake, sitting in my study with the lights off, watching the perimeter monitors. I knew he would come. Hank was a man whose entire life was a series of escapes, but tonight he had run out of road. The black SUV careened around the corner. It did not slow down. It mounted the curb, tearing up the zoysia grass I had cultivated for a decade. It plowed through the azalea bushes and slammed into the wrought iron gate with a deafening metallic crunch. The gate held, but the SUV's front end crumpled like a tin can. Steam hissed from the radiator into the cool night air. I did not flinch. I took a sip of my tea. The driver's door was kicked open. Hank stumbled out. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn at the steakhouse 3 days ago, now stained and wrinkled. He held a half-empty bottle of bourbon in one hand and an aluminum baseball bat in the other. He swayed on his feet, his face purple with rage and intoxication. "Thad," he screamed, his voice slurring. "Come out here, you coward. Come out here and face me like a man." He threw the bourbon bottle at the house. It shattered against the brick facade, leaving a wet stain below the living room window. I watched him on the high-definition screen. He was pathetic. A man who had lived his life manipulating others, now reduced to a primitive state of violence. He marched up the driveway past the ruined gate. My vintage Mercedes was parked near the garage. I had left it there intentionally. It was insured. It was replaceable. It was a target. Hank raised the bat. He brought it down on the windshield of the Mercedes. The safety glass spiderwebbed with a sickening crack. He swung again. The side mirror flew off. He swung again, denting the hood. He was putting all his frustration, all his failure into every blow. I opened the app on my tablet. I navigated to the home automation controls. I could have called the local police immediately. They would have arrived in 5 minutes, but I had a different call to make first. I opened my email and sent a pre-drafted message to the tip line of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Fugitive Task Force. It contained a single photo of Hank standing in my driveway, time-stamped now, along with the GPS coordinates. Subject fugitive Henry Miller, location confirmed, armed and dangerous. Then I turned back to the home controls. Hank was preparing to swing at the driver's side window. He was panting, sweating heavily. I pressed the button marked Irrigation System Zone 4. 12 high-pressure sprinkler heads popped up from the lawn and flower beds surrounding the driveway. They were industrial grade, designed to water a large estate. I had modified the pressure settings. Jets of cold water blasted Hank from every angle. He sputtered and slipped, dropping the bat. He tried to shield his face, but the water was relentless. It soaked his clothes instantly. It filled his shoes. He slipped on the wet pavement and fell hard onto the concrete. He scrambled to his feet, slipping again, cursing at the water, cursing at me, cursing at the world. I pressed the button for the external PA system. My voice boomed out over the driveway, amplified and distorted slightly by the speakers hidden in the eaves. "Henry Miller," I said calmly into the microphone, "you are trespassing on private property. You are currently being recorded." Hank looked up at the house, searching for the source of the voice. He looked like a drowned rat. "Shut up," he screamed at the house. "Shut up and give me the money. You ruined my family. You owe me." "You ruined yourself, Hank," I replied, my voice echoing through the neighborhood. "And now you are going to pay the bill." He picked up the bat again. He charged toward the front door. He was going to try to break in. He was going to try to hurt me. I watched him come. I stood up and walked to the front hall. I picked up the Louisville Slugger I had left by the door. I stood ready. But he never made it to the porch. Blue and red lights flooded the street. Not just one cruiser, but 3. And behind them an unmarked sedan that I knew belonged to the federal marshals or the state task force. The response time was impressive when a fugitive warrant was involved. Hank froze. He turned around, blinking in the blinding glare of the spotlights. "Drop the weapon," a voice commanded over a loudspeaker. "Drop it now." Hank hesitated. For a second, I thought he might charge the police. I thought he might choose suicide by cop rather than face the consequences of his fraud. But Hank was a coward. He dropped the bat. It clanged on the driveway. He raised his shaking hands. "Get on the ground." Hank knelt in the water from the sprinklers, which I had not turned off. He lay face down on the wet pavement. Officers swarmed him. They were not gentle. They kneeled on his back. They cuffed his hands tightly behind him. They dragged him up. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The water from the sprinklers misted the air, creating rainbows in the police lights. Officer Hernandez was there again. She walked up the driveway, stepping over the bat. "Mr. King." "Are you hurt?" she asked, shouting over the noise of the water. "I am fine," I said. I turned off the sprinklers with a tap on my phone. The silence returned sudden and stark. "He destroyed your car," she noted, looking at the Mercedes. "It is just metal," I said. A man in a windbreaker walked up. He had a badge on his belt. "Mr. King, I am Agent Ross, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Thank you for the tip. We have been looking for Mr. Miller for 6 months. He is all yours," I said. They dragged Hank toward the unmarked car. He saw me standing on the porch, dry and untouched. "You are the devil," he screamed, spitting water. "You planned this. You set us up." I did not say anything. I just watched. Then another car screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. It was a taxi. The door flew open and Brenda spilled out. She was wearing a nightgown with a coat thrown over it. She must have been waiting in the cab down the street, watching to see if Hank succeeded. "Hank," she wailed, running toward the police line. "Do not take him. He is sick." He didn't mean it. An officer stopped her. "Ma, stay back." She saw Hank being shoved into the back of the federal car. She saw the handcuffs. She saw the end of her freedom. She turned to me. She ran up the driveway, her slippers slapping against the wet concrete. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "How could you?" she sobbed. "We are family. We are your in-laws. How could you send him to prison? Who is going to take care of me?" I looked down at her. She was a woman who had spent her life grifting, lying, and enabling a criminal. She had mocked me in my own kitchen. She had conspired to put me in a home. "You have a daughter, Brenda," I said coldly. "I suggest you ask her." "Oh, wait, she is in jail too." Brenda wailed. It was a sound of pure self-pity. She fell to her knees on the wet driveway. "Please, Thad," she begged. "I have nowhere to go. I have no money. Let me stay in the guest room, just for a few nights, until I sort this out." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had texted Paige saying I was a lonely old fool. "The guest room is closed," I said. "And so is the bank." Officer Hernandez approached Brenda. "Ma, you need to leave the property. The homeowner has a protective order against you as well." "But I have nowhere to go," she cried. "That is not a police matter," Hernandez said firmly. "Come on, let us get you a taxi to a shelter." They led her away. She looked back at me one last time. Her face was a mask of shock. She genuinely could not believe that her tears had not worked. She could not believe that I was immune to her manipulation. I watched as the convoy of police cars pulled away. Hank was gone, extradited to face felony fraud charges. Brenda was gone, sent to a homeless shelter. Paige was in jail. Darius was in jail. The driveway was empty except for the ruined car and the baseball bat. I walked down the steps. I picked up the bat. It was a cheap aluminum thing dented from hitting my car. I walked over to the trash bin at the curb and dropped it inside. I looked at my house. The gate was smashed. The lawn was torn up. The window was broken. It was damaged, but it was standing. I went back inside. I locked the door. I set the alarm. I went into the kitchen and made myself a fresh cup of tea. I sat at the table and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. The parasites were gone. The infection was cleared. The fever had broken. I was alone. And for the first time in months, I felt completely safe. The war was entering its final phase, the cleanup. And I was very good at cleaning up. The dismantling of my son's life did not require my direct intervention. It only required gravity. Once the structural supports of my money were removed, the collapse was inevitable and rapid. I received the final intelligence report from Vance on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the arrests. It detailed the end of the marriage between Darius and Paige. It was not a tragic separation filled with tearful goodbyes. It was a business transaction that had ceased to be profitable. Darius had managed to secure a release from jail pending his trial, likely through a predatory bail bondsman who took the title to Darius' car, which technically still belonged to the bank as collateral. He had walked out of the detention center wearing the same clothes he had been arrested in, smelling of despair and jail soap. He went immediately to the Motel 6, expecting to find his wife waiting to comfort him. He expected a partner in his misery. Instead, he found an empty room. The key card did not work. The manager informed him that Mrs. King had checked out 2 hours earlier. She had not left a forwarding address. She had not left a note. She had left him with the bill for the minibar which she had emptied. Vance's report included photographs taken later that day. They showed Paige sitting on the patio of a bistro in Midtown. She was not crying. She was not mourning her parents' incarceration or her husband's indictment. She was laughing. Across from her sat a man I recognized from the social columns, a real estate developer in his 60s, known for his liquidity and his fondness for younger women. Paige was leaning forward, touching his arm, giving him the same wide-eyed look of adoration she had once given Darius. She had pivoted. She had identified a new host. Darius was a dry well, so she had moved on to the next reservoir. I set the photos down on my desk. I felt no satisfaction, only a cold validation. I had told Darius she was a parasite. He had chosen to believe she was a soulmate. Now he knew the truth. But the tuition for that lesson had been his entire life. The rest of the week was a study in disintegration. Darius was evicted from the hotel lobby where he tried to sleep. He was banned from his favorite bars because his tabs were unpaid. He called his friends the drinking buddies he had bought rounds for with my credit card, but they did not answer. He was radioactive. He was a man with a felony charge pending no job, no wife, and no money. On Friday morning, I stood on the front lawn of my estate. The air was cool and fresh. The landscaping crew had just finished repairing the damage Hank had done to the grass. The driveway was clean. The gate was fixed. The house looked perfect, majestic, and imposing. It was the symbol of everything I had achieved. And it was time to let it go. I had signed the papers the day before. I had sold the property to a private equity firm that planned to turn it into an executive retreat. The price was $3.2 million cash. It was a record for the neighborhood. I did not care about the money. I cared about the erasure. I was washing my hands of the memories. I was liquidating the legacy that Darius thought was his birthright. A white truck pulled up to the curb. 2 men in coveralls got out carrying a heavy wooden post and a sign. I directed them to the spot right next to the newly repaired gate. They dug the hole. They set the post. They hung the sign. Sold. The letters were red and bold. They screamed finality. As the workers were packing up their tools, I saw a figure walking up the street. He was moving slowly, shuffling his feet. He wore a wrinkled suit jacket over a dirty t-shirt. His shoes were scuffed. He looked like a ghost haunting the scene of his own death. It was Darius. He stopped at the edge of the driveway. He looked at the house. He looked at the pristine lawn. He looked at the new gate, and then his eyes landed on the sign. I stood on the porch holding a cup of coffee. I watched him. I did not wave. I did not call out. I simply bore witness. Darius stared at the word sold. His mouth opened slightly. He blinked as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked from the sign to me. He walked closer, stepping onto the driveway. He stopped 10 feet away from me. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His eyes were hollow. The arrogance that had defined him for years was gone, replaced by a raw, terrified vulnerability. "You sold it," he whispered, his voice cracking. I took a sip of coffee. "Yes," I said. "But this is my house," he said, the old entitlement flickering for a second before dying out. "I grew up here. You always said this would be mine one day. I did say that I agreed. I said that when you were a boy. I said that when I thought you would grow into a man who respected his name. But you did not grow up, Darius. You just grew older." He looked at the house again. He looked at the window of his old bedroom. He looked at the east wing where he had tried to house the fugitives. He was doing the math. He was calculating the value of what was slipping through his fingers. $3 million, he murmured. "You sold my inheritance." "It was never your inheritance," I corrected him. "It was my asset. An inheritance is a gift given to those who honor the legacy. You tried to steal the legacy. You tried to declare the legacy incompetent. You tried to break into the legacy with a pry bar." He flinched at the memory. "Paige left me," he said, his voice trembling. "She is gone, Dad. She took everything she could carry and she left. She is with some other guy now." "I know," I said. "You knew she would leave," he said, looking at me with a mix of accusation and awe. "You knew the moment the money ran out she would go." "I told you she was a parasite," I said. "You chose the parasite over the provider. Now you have neither." He fell to his knees on the driveway. It was not a theatrical gesture this time. His legs simply gave out. He began to weep. He cried for his wife. He cried for his house. He cried for the easy life that had evaporated. "I have nowhere to go," he sobbed. "I am sleeping in a park, Dad. I am hungry. Please. I am your son. You cannot leave me like this." I looked down at him. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the echo of the love I used to have for him. But then I looked at the scar on my forehead. I remembered the glass shattering. I remembered the betrayal. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a business card and a single $100 bill. I walked down the steps and stood in front of him. I held them out. Darius looked at the money. He reached for it, his hand shaking. "Take it," I said. He grabbed the bill, clutching it like a lifeline. Then he looked at the card. "What is this?" he asked. "It is the contact information for a temp agency," I said. "They specialize in manual labor, construction, demolition, hard work. They hire people with criminal records. If you start tomorrow, you will have a paycheck by Friday." He looked at the card as if it were an insult. "You want me to be a laborer," he said. "I want you to be a man," I replied. "You have spent your life eating fruit you did not pick. Now you are going to learn how to plant the tree." I turned around and walked back up the steps. "Dad, wait," he called out. "Can I come inside? Just for a shower, just for a meal, please?" I stopped at the door. I looked back at the sold sign. "This is no longer my house, Darius," I said. "The new owners take possession on Monday. I am just a guest here now, and guests cannot invite strangers in." I walked inside and closed the door. I locked it. I went to the window and watched through the blinds. Darius stayed on his knees for a long time, clutching the $100 and the card. He looked at the house one last time. He looked at the sign that marked the end of his expectations. Then slowly he stood up. He wiped his face with his dirty sleeve. He looked at the card in his hand. He put it in his pocket. He turned and walked away down the driveway, past the gate and onto the street. He walked away from the mansion he thought he deserved and toward the bus stop. He was alone. He was broke. He was broken. But for the first time in his life, he was walking on his own 2 feet. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner. I felt a profound sense of release. The house was sold. The money was secure in the trust. The toxic ties were severed. I turned away from the window. The rooms were filled with boxes. The movers were coming in the morning. I was ready to go. I was ready for the penthouse view. I was ready for the quiet. Darius had lost a fortune because he listened to a woman who threw a glass. It was the most expensive drink in history. And as I finished my coffee, I hoped that the bitter taste of that loss would finally teach him the one thing I never could. The value of earning your own way. Phase 5 was complete. The slate was wiped clean. The sound of the gate closing behind Darius felt like the final seal on a vault. I sat in my new penthouse on the 35th floor overlooking the sprawling grid of Atlanta. The city lights shimmered below a sea of activity that I was now comfortably removed from. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady frequency of expensive silence. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. It was a text from Anika Patel. "Paige has been indicted in Florida," she wrote. "Multiple counts of credit card fraud and identity theft. She tried to use a stolen card to buy a plane ticket to Europe. She is being held without bail." I read the message twice. Paige, the architect of my misery, the woman who threw the glass, was finally in a cage she could not charm her way out of. The justice system had done what I could not. It had removed her from the equation permanently. Then another message came through. A photo. It was from my friend in Houston. It showed a construction site dusty and chaotic under the Texas sun. In the background, wearing a hard hat and a neon vest holding a clipboard, was Darius. He looked tired. He looked sweaty. But he was standing upright. He was working. He made the flight, the caption read. He showed up early. He is asking good questions. I looked at the image of my son. He was 1,000 miles away building someone else's dream, but for the first time in his life he was building his own character. He was not smiling. He did not look happy, but he looked real. I put the phone down. I walked to the wet bar in the corner of the room. I opened a bottle of vintage Merlot, a bottle far superior to the one that had stained my shirt on Easter Sunday. I poured a glass. The deep red liquid swirled, catching the light. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind was brisk at this altitude. I looked down at the world below. People say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as an excuse to tolerate abuse, to enable weakness, to forgive the unforgivable. But I had learned a different truth. Blood is just biology. Loyalty, respect, and dignity, those are the bonds that matter, and sometimes you have to drain the bad blood to save the body. I had lost a son and found a stranger. I had lost a home and found a sanctuary. I had been attacked, and I had won the war. I raised the glass to the horizon. To selfishness, I said to the empty air. I took a sip. It was dry, complex, and had a finish that lingered. It tasted like freedom. The war was over. The parasites were gone, and I, Thaddeus King, was finally exactly where I wanted to be, alone, safe, and undeniably right. I finished the wine and went inside, closing the door on the noise of the world. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the foyer of my new life. The penthouse on the 35th floor of the Sovereign Building was not a home in the traditional sense. It was a command center. It was a fortress of glass and steel floating above the humid chaos of Atlanta. There were no oak trees here to hide fugitives. There were no basement windows to pry open. There was only biometric security, 24-hour concierge service, and the silence of absolute solitude. I walked across the Italian marble floor. My footsteps echoed slightly, a clean, sharp sound that replaced the creaking floorboards of the Buckhead estate. I had sold the furniture with the house. I had left the memories in the drywall. Here everything was new. The furniture was modern leather and chrome. The art was abstract. The air smelled of nothing, which was exactly how I wanted it. I sat down on the sofa facing the floor to ceiling windows. The city sprawled out beneath me, a grid of lights and traffic. Somewhere down there, people were arguing. Somewhere down there, families were tearing each other apart over money they did not earn. But up here, the air was thin and clear. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. It was a notification from Anika Patel. I picked it up. It was a forwarded email from a district attorney in Florida. Subject: indictment of Paige Miller. I opened the attachment. It was a mugshot. Paige looked terrible. Her hair was matted. Her makeup was gone. She was wearing a gray inmate uniform that washed out her complexion. The defiance in her eyes was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a trapped animal. The text of the email was brief and brutal. Paige had been arrested at Miami International Airport. She had tried to purchase a one-way ticket to Paris using a stolen credit card number she had bought on the dark web. She had also been carrying a fake passport. She was facing federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and flight to avoid prosecution. Because she was a flight risk, bail had been denied. I looked at her face one last time. The woman who had thrown a wine glass at me because I wouldn't house her criminal parents was now going to be housed by the state for a very long time. She had wanted a free room. She got a cell. I deleted the email. I did not feel joy. I did not feel vindication. I felt the satisfaction of a mathematical equation balancing out to zero. She was an error in the code and she had been debugged. A moment later, another message arrived. This one was from my old friend in Houston, the owner of the construction firm where I had sent Darius. It was a photo. The image was grainy, taken from a distance with a cell phone zoom. It showed a construction site under the blazing Texas sun. Dust hung in the air. In the center of the frame, a man was shoveling gravel into a wheelbarrow. He was wearing a yellow safety vest and a hard hat. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat. His posture was slumped with exhaustion, but he was standing. It was Darius. The caption read simply, "He showed up. He threw up at lunch, but he went back to work." I zoomed in on my son's face. He looked miserable. He looked like a man who had never done a hard day's work in his life because he hadn't. But he was there. He wasn't in a hotel bar. He wasn't begging me for money. He was earning $12 an hour shoveling rocks. It was the first honest money he had made in a decade. I saved the photo. I did not reply. He did not need my praise. He needed the blisters on his hands to teach him what I had failed to teach him with my wallet. He was starting from zero at 32 years old. It was late, but it was not too late. I put the phone down on the table. The screen went black, reflecting the city lights above. I stood up and walked to the wet bar in the corner of the room. I opened the wine fridge. The blue light illuminated the rows of bottles. I selected a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, a vintage far superior to the one Paige had wasted on my shirt. I pulled the cork. The sound was a soft pop, a punctuation mark on the end of a long sentence. I poured the dark red liquid into a crystal glass. It swirled, catching the light, looking like liquid rubies. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind was brisk at this altitude, whipping my collar. I leaned against the railing and looked out at the horizon. I thought about the accusation that had started this war. "You are being selfish." They had meant it as an insult. They had meant to shame me into compliance. But standing here with my peace and my silence, I realized they were right. I had been selfish. I had chosen to protect my sanity over their comfort. I had chosen to protect my assets over their greed. I had chosen to save my own life rather than let them drain it dry. And it was the best decision I had ever made. People say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as a weapon. They use it to guilt you into tolerating abuse, to enable weakness to forgive the unforgivable. They tell you that family is everything, even when family is the hand holding the knife. But I had learned a different truth, a harder truth. Blood is just biology. It is just genetic coding. Loyalty, respect, and dignity. Those are the bonds that matter. Those are the structural beams that hold a life together. And sometimes when the biological bonds become toxic, you have to drain the bad blood to save the body. I had lost a son and found a stranger. I had lost a home and found a sanctuary. I had been attacked in my own dining room and I had won the war without throwing a single punch. I raised the glass to the night sky. To selfishness, I said to the empty air. I took a sip. The wine was complex with notes of oak and dark fruit. It was dry, but the finish was sweet. It tasted like freedom. I finished the glass and went back inside, sliding the heavy glass door shut against the noise of the world. The apartment was quiet. The war was over, and I, Thaddeus King, was finally exactly where I belonged, alone, safe, and undeniably right. Many parents believe their duty is to give until they are empty, confusing financial support with love. I made that mistake, and in doing so, I crippled my son's ability to stand on his own. I learned that being the safety net for toxic people does not save them. It only prolongs their immaturity. The hardest truth I had to accept was that saving my dignity required breaking my own heart. True family is built on mutual respect, not DNA. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cut the rope and let them learn to swim. If you believe that boundaries are essential for self-respect, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a family member to save your own peace?